Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when walking alone in the woods at night, even when you know there's nothing to fear? I never believed in ghost stories or superstitions. As a field researcher specializing in folklore studies, I had spent years documenting local legends across rural communities. People always had tales of haunted places or malevolent spirits, but behind every story was usually a rational explanation. Animal sound mistaken for a moan, wind through tree branches interpreted as whispers, or shadows playing tricks on frightened minds. That's what I told myself as I drove along the narrow country road toward Black Hollow Forest. My notebook was filled with accounts from locals about the strange phenomena in those woods. They called it the Whispering Grove, a circular clearing deep within the forest where ancient trees formed an almost perfect ring. According to legend, it was once a sacred site where pagan rituals were conducted centuries ago. The trees remember what happened there. An elderly woman had told me the previous day, her withered hands trembling slightly as she poured my tea. They whisper the names of the forgotten at night. Those who hear them never come back the same. I smiled politely at her warning, jotting down notes about how fear often manifests in rural communities through oral traditions. This would make an excellent chapter in my upcoming book. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I parked at the forest's edge. The October air held an unusual stillness, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows between the trees. I checked my backpack, flashlight, recorder, camera, extra batteries, water, and snacks. Enough for my planned overnight observation in the forest. Perfect timing, I muttered to myself, watching the sun beginning its descent. I wanted to experience the forest through dusk, night, and dawn, the transitions when people most often reported strange phenomena. As I locked my car and adjusted my backpack, a park ranger's vehicle pulled up alongside mine. Heading into Black Hollow, asked the ranger, a man in his 50s with a withered face and eyes that had seen too much. His name tag read Miller. Yes, research for a book on regional folklore, I explained, showing him my university credentials. I've heard fascinating stories about this forest. Something in his expression shifted. You planning to stay after dark? That's the plan. I have camping permits and all the necessary gear. Ranger Miller's gaze drifted toward the forest. There's another storm system moving in tonight. Might want to reconsider. I checked my weather app. My forecast shows clear skies. Weather changes quick around here, he insisted. And these woods, they're different at night. I smiled politely. I appreciate the concern, but I've camped in worse conditions. He seemed to consider saying something else, but instead reached into his vehicle and handed me a whistle. If you get into trouble, 3 sharp blasts. I'll be on duty until midnight. I thanked him and pocketed the whistle, amused by his concern but appreciative nonetheless. The forest welcomed me with a symphony of late autumn sounds, leaves crunching underfoot, birds calling to each other, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I followed the main trail for 2 miles before consulting my map and turning onto a less traveled path that would lead to the Whispering Grove. The farther I ventured from the main trail, the denser the forest became. Ancient oaks and maples stood like silent sentinels, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the waning sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I zipped up my jacket. something caught my attention, a sound just at the edge of hearing. I stopped and listened intently. Nothing but the normal forest sounds. Yet as I continued walking, the sensation of being watched intensified. I paused again, looking over my shoulder. The forest behind me appeared empty, yet something felt off. The birds had gone silent. I took out my recorder and pressed record. October 15th, 4:45 p.m. Approximately 2.5 miles into Black Hollow Forest. Notable drop in ambient forest noise. Temperature approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A twig snapped somewhere to my left. I turned quickly, scanning the trees and undergrowth. Hello? Is someone there? My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. No response came, but as I stood perfectly still, I noticed something odd about the pattern of shadows between the trees. One shadow seemed darker than the others, with edges too defined to be cast by the surrounding vegetation. I blinked, and the shadow was gone. Tricks of the light, I muttered, continuing my hike with quickened steps. By the time I reached the Whispering Grove, twilight had fallen. The clearing matched the descriptions perfectly, a near-perfect circle roughly 30 yards in diameter, surrounded by 12 massive oak trees whose branches stretched toward each other like fingers almost touching. The center of the grove was oddly bare, no small trees, no underbrush, just grass and scattered stones that formed no discernible pattern to the untrained eye. But my research suggested this was once a ritual site. I set up my small tent near the edge of the clearing, not wanting to disturb the central area that might hold archaeological significance. As darkness descended fully, I built a small fire and began documenting my observations. The Whispering Grove appears undisturbed by modern human activity. The circular formation of trees suggests possible human intervention centuries ago, supporting local legends of this being a ritual site. As night fell completely, the forest transformed. Darkness pooled between trees like black water, and the stars overhead seemed unusually bright and cold. My fire cast dancing shadows across the clearing, making the trees appear to sway even though no wind blew. I heated some soup on my portable stove and ate in silence, occasionally making notes about the unusual acoustics of the clearing. Sound seemed both muffled and occasionally amplified, as if the grove itself was playing with audio frequencies. After dinner, I walked the perimeter of the clearing, using my flashlight to examine the ancient oaks. Their trunks were massive, perhaps hundreds of years old, with bark patterns that resembled faces from certain angles. It was as I completed my circuit that I first heard it, a sound so faint I initially thought it was just the wind. But there was no wind tonight. It was a whisper. I froze, straining to hear. It came again, seemingly from everywhere and nowhere at once, unintelligible but unmistakably a human voice, or something mimicking one. Hello? I called out, sweeping my flashlight across the darkened forest. Is someone there? The whispering stopped immediately. Heart pounding, I returned to my campfire and retrieved my digital recorder. I walked slowly to the center of the clearing and placed the device on one of the stones, pressing record. 9:23 p.m. Ambient temperature has dropped to approximately 40 degrees. Just experience what sounds like whispering from an indeterminate direction. I sat beside the recorder, waiting in silence. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to retrieve the device, it came again, clearer this time. Return what was taken. I jumped to my feet, spinning around. Who's there? Show yourself. The forest remained still, but the whisper came again, this time from behind me. They are still here. My scientific mind raced for explanations, sound carrying from distant hikers, the wind through peculiarly shaped branches, even the possibility of pranksters. But deep in my gut, a primal fear was awakening. I grabbed my recorder and retreated to my tent, zipping myself inside as if the thin fabric could provide protection from whatever was out there. Reviewing the recording, my blood ran cold. The whispers had been captured, but they were louder on the recording than they had been to my ears. And there were more of them, overlapping voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Sleep evaded me as I lay in my sleeping bag, every sound magnified by my growing unease. The rational part of my brain insisted there was a logical explanation, but another part, a deeper, older instinct, screamed that something was very wrong in the Whispering Grove. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overcame fear, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. I dreamed of roots growing through soil, of bones buried in forgotten graves, of rituals performed under moonlight and the dying screams of sacrifices made to hungry gods. I awoke with a start, disoriented and cold. My watch read 3:17 a.m., the dead of night. Something had pulled me from sleep, but I wasn't sure what. Then I heard it again, not a whisper this time, but a clear, distinct voice right outside my tent. "We've been waiting for you, Professor." My blood turned to ice. No one had called me Professor, not the locals, not Ranger Miller. No one here knew my academic position. With trembling hands, I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, something brushed against the outside of my tent, something that felt like fingers trailing along the fabric. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. No answer came, but the temperature inside my tent plummeted. My breath fogged in front of my face as the whispering began again, not one voice now but many, surrounding my tent from all sides, growing in volume and urgency. "Join us. See what we've seen. Know what we know." I clutched my sleeping bag around me, squeezing my eyes shut as if I could block out the voices. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "It's just suggestion and folklore taking hold of my imagination." But when I opened my eyes, I saw something that defied all rational explanation, shadows moving across the walls of my tent, illuminated by moonlight. Human-shaped shadows circling my tent, though nothing could be casting them. And they were whispering my name. What if the legends were true all along? The thought crashed through my mind as I huddled in my tent, watching those impossible shadows circle me. My academic training warred with what my senses were telling me. Every logical explanation dissolved with each passing second. I fumbled for my phone to record what was happening, but the device was dead despite having been fully charged earlier. My flashlight flickered weakly when I tried it, its beam barely penetrating the darkness. "This is impossible," I whispered, more to reassure myself than anything else. The whispering voices responded immediately, as if delighted by my fear. "Nothing is impossible here." I needed to see what was happening outside. With shaking hands, I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The clearing looked transformed. The moonlight cast an eerie blue glow over everything, and a thin mist had formed, hovering about a foot above the ground. My campfire had died to embers, casting just enough light to make the shadows deeper. What I saw next nearly stopped my heart. Dark figures stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, unnaturally still silhouettes barely distinguishable from the trees behind them. They didn't appear solid, their edges wavered like smoke in still air. I counted 7 of them, positioned between the ancient oaks, watching my tent. I closed the zipper quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. This had to be some kind of hallucination. Perhaps toxic spores from forest fungi, or carbon monoxide from my poorly ventilated campfire. But the whispering continued, growing more insistent. She has come to us. She will hear our story. She will carry our names. The voices had a strange, hollow quality, like they were speaking through water or from the bottom of a well. And they seemed to be discussing me as if I couldn't hear them. I covered my ears, but the whispers penetrated through my fingers, becoming clearer. Show her what happened. Let her feel it. Our pain must be known. A sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, violently shaking my tent. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the inside of the tent fabric. I could see my breath clearly now, pluming in the freezing air. Something scratched at the tent door, not animal claws, but fingernails. Long, deliberate strokes from top to bottom. Please, I begged, but I wasn't sure who or what I was pleading with. I'm just here to study the legends. Then study us, came a voice directly outside the tent, no longer whispering but speaking clearly. Open the door and see. Every instinct screamed for me to stay put, to wait for dawn, but some unseen force was tugging at my consciousness, a compulsion that grew stronger by the second. My hand moved toward the zipper as if it belonged to someone else. Don't do it, the rational part of my brain pleaded. But my fingers were already pulling the zipper down. The tent opening revealed the clearing, now completely transformed. The mist had thickened, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. And standing directly before my tent was nothing. Nothing visible, at least. But I could feel a presence, a cold spot in the air that had form and weight without substance. Who are you? I whispered. The mist before me coalesced, not into a human shape, but into symbols that hung in the air, ancient glyphs that glowed faintly blue. I recognized elements of pre-Christian European iconography from my studies, symbols associated with sacrifice and passage between worlds. As I stared at them, knowledge flooded into my mind, not as words but as images and sensations. People in robes gathered in this clearing hundreds of years ago, a ritual gone wrong, blood soaking into the soil, screams cutting through the night air, and something ancient and hungry awakening beneath the grove. The visions hit me with such force that I fell backward, gasping for air. When my vision cleared, the glyphs were gone, but the dark figures at the edge of the clearing had moved closer. Pure terror propelled me out of the tent. I stumbled to my feet and ran to the center of the clearing, frantically looking for an escape path, but the shadowy figures had formed a complete circle around the grove. What do you want from me? I shouted, my voice breaking. The whispers returned, but this time they formed a unified chorus, remember us. The ground beneath my feet began to change, the grass withering before my eyes, revealing soil that turned dark and moist, as if freshly disturbed. The scent of earth filled my nostrils, along with something metallic and sickly sweet. Blood. Ancient blood that had soaked these grounds. I turned in a desperate circle, looking for any gap in the ring of shadows. There was none. My only option was my tent and gear. I lunged back toward it, grabbing my backpack and the emergency whistle Ranger Miller had given me. The shadows began advancing, shrinking the circle. I put the whistle to my lips and blew 3 desperate blasts, the sound piercing the unnatural silence of the grove. Nothing happened. No response came from the darkness beyond the clearing. I was completely alone. Or rather, alone with them. One of the shadow figures separated from the others and moved toward me. Unlike the others, this one began to take on more definition as it approached, the vague outline of a woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face a dark void. I scrambled backward until I hit one of the ancient oaks. The bark felt unnaturally warm against my back, pulsing like something alive. The shadow woman stopped a few feet away, her form flickering like a bad television signal. When she spoke, her voice was clearer than the others, tinged with an accent I couldn't place. "You seek our stories," she said. "Now you will become part of them." "I don't understand," I replied, my voice barely audible. "The grove has been waiting. It grows hungry again." As she spoke, the ground beneath my feet shifted slightly. I looked down to see the soil moving, as if something was pushing up from below. With a cry, I jumped away, watching in horror as the earth continued to bulge upward. Something was emerging, something pale and slender that at first I mistook for a root. It was a finger. A human finger, pushing through the soil. More appeared beside it, an entire hand breaking through the earth, followed by an arm clothed in rotted fabric. The soil erupted as a figure began to emerge, a corpse in a state of partial decay, its clothes from another century. I ran. Abandoning my gear, I sprinted toward the edge of the clearing, directly at the ring of shadow figures. They didn't move to stop me, but as I passed through their circle, the air turned thick and cold, like running through viscous liquid. Beyond them, the forest had changed. The familiar path I'd followed earlier was gone, replaced by dense, unfamiliar trees growing too close together. The moonlight barely penetrated here, leaving me in near total darkness. I pulled out my phone again, desperately trying to activate its flashlight function. The screen flickered weakly to life, showing no signal but providing just enough light to see a few feet ahead. Behind me, the whispers pursued, no longer confined to the clearing but spreading through the forest like a wave. The trees themselves seemed to be whispering now, their branches creaking and swaying without wind. "You cannot leave until you understand," they said. "Until you see what we saw. Feel what we felt." I stumbled forward, my phone's dim light barely illuminating the ground before my feet. Every direction looked the same, dense trees and undergrowth that hadn't been there hours earlier. The forest had become a maze. My foot caught on something, sending me sprawling face first onto the forest floor. As I pushed myself up, my hands sank into soil that felt wrong, too soft and wet. My phone had landed nearby, its screen casting just enough light for me to see what I tripped over. A human skull, partially buried, its empty eye socket staring up at me. I screamed then, a primal sound torn from my throat. Scrambling back to my feet, I ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping in my face and arms. The whispers followed, growing louder and more numerous, becoming a cacophony of pleading, angry voices. "Take our place. Join the sacrifice. The grove must be fed." My lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, but terror kept me moving. I had no idea if I was getting farther from the grove or running in circles. The forest seemed endless, a dark labyrinth designed to trap me. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, I broke through into a small clearing, not the whispering grove, but a natural break in the trees. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. In the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy, I could see I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the clearing's edge, solid and human, not one of the shadow people. "Hello?" I called out, hope flaring in my chest. "Please, I need help." The figure turned, and my hope died. It was Ranger Miller, but something was terribly wrong. He moved with a stiff, unnatural gait as he approached, and his eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. "I told you," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, "these woods are different at night. We need to get out of here," I pleaded. "There's something in the grove." "I know what's in the grove," he interrupted. "I've always known. Just like those before me knew." He reached into his jacket and removed something that gleamed in the moonlight, a knife with unusual markings on the blade. "The grove must be fed," he said, echoing the whispers that still surrounded us. "It's been too long since the last offering." Understanding crashed over me like ice water. The ranger wasn't here to help me, he had led me here. The warnings about weather, the convenient appearance just as I was entering the forest, the whistle that no one would hear. "You're part of this," I whispered. His face remained impassive. "I am its caretaker. As my father was before me, and his father before him. We keep the old ways alive. By killing innocent people?" I backed away slowly. "No one who enters the grove is innocent," he replied. "You came seeking its secrets. Now you'll become one of them." He advanced, knife raised. I turned to run, but found my path blocked by the shadow figures who had materialized behind me. They were more solid now, their features becoming more defined, men and women in clothing from different eras, all bearing the same hollow eyes and expressions of endless sorrow. I was trapped between the ranger and the shadows, with nowhere to run. "Please," I begged, eyes darting between the advancing ranger and the spectral figures behind me. "I'm a researcher. People know I'm here. They'll come looking for me." Ranger Miller's face remained expressionless. "Many have come looking over the years. They join the others." My mind raced frantically. The knife in his hand gleamed dully in the moonlight, very real, very physical. Whatever supernatural elements were at play, that blade would kill me just as surely as any mundane weapon. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to buy time while searching for an escape route. "The forest requires balance," he said, his voice taking on a rhythmic, practiced quality, like a prayer recited countless times. "What was awakened cannot be put back to sleep. It must be fed, or it will take what it needs." Behind me, the whispering intensified, becoming almost like the sound of wind through dry leaves. "Fed, fed, fed." With my back to a large oak tree, I had nowhere left to retreat. The ranger closed in, knife raised. In desperation, I grabbed a fallen branch from the ground and swung it wildly. The makeshift weapon connected with his arm, causing him to drop the knife. He grunted in pain but seemed more annoyed than injured. Before he could recover the blade, I bolted past him, running deeper into the unknown forest. "You can't escape," his voice called after me, eerily calm despite our struggle. "The forest won't let you leave until it's satisfied." I ran blindly, branches whipping my face and arms. The moonlight played tricks with the shadows, making every tree seem like a lurking figure. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but raw fear propelled me forward. After several minutes of frantic flight, I paused behind a massive tree trunk to catch my breath. The forest had fallen silent, no whispers, no footsteps in pursuit. Even the normal nighttime sounds of insects and animals were absent. Had I escaped? Or run deeper into the trap? Leaning against the tree, I tried to orient myself. Without my pack, I had no compass, no map, no proper flashlight. My phone was nearly dead, its screen providing only the faintest illumination. But I needed to see where I was. Activating the screen, I swept the dim light around me. The trees here were different, older, their bark blackened as if by ancient fire. The ground was covered not with the usual forest detritus, but with small white flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Death flowers, I remembered from my research. According to local folklore, they grew only where the dead were buried. I was standing in a graveyard. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. As my phone's light passed over the ground, I could see subtle mounds in the earth, dozens of them, unmarked but unmistakable in their purpose and shape. A twig snapped nearby, and I froze, holding my breath. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the soft crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves. I pressed myself against the tree, hoping the darkness would conceal me. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then a voice, not whispering this time, but clear and terrifyingly close. "I can hear your heart beating." It wasn't Ranger Miller's voice. Slowly, I peered around the tree trunk. Standing not 10 feet away was a young woman in a white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her feet were bare and dirty, her long hair tangled with leaves and twigs. In the dim light, I could see that her dress was stained with dark patches. Blood. But most disturbing were her eyes, completely black, without whites or pupils, like pools of ink. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Elizabeth," she replied, her voice oddly normal despite her supernatural appearance. "Elizabeth Holloway. I was the spring sacrifice in 1872. My academic mind automatically filed away the date, even as the rest of me trembled with fear. "Sacrifice?" She tilted her head, studying me with those impossible eyes. "You're different from the others. You came seeking knowledge, not thrill or treasure. Others? The ones Miller and his ancestors have brought to the grove over the years. Hikers, campers, curious locals." She gestured at the ground around us. "We all rest here now." I swallowed hard. "Are you going to hurt me?" For the first time, an expression crossed her face, something like sadness. "I cannot hurt you. None of us can. We are bound to this place, witnesses only." "Witnesses to what?" "To what happens in the grove. To what lies beneath it." She took a step closer. "But you might be able to end it." Hope flared briefly. "How?" "By understanding what happened. By remembering us." Elizabeth looked over her shoulder, as if hearing something I couldn't. "He's coming. Miller. He knows these woods better than anyone alive. Help me," I pleaded. "Tell me how to get out of here." "I cannot lead you out," she said, "but I can show you the truth. If you know the truth, you might find a way." She extended her hand toward me. Everything I knew about folklore and ghost stories screamed that I shouldn't touch her, but what choice did I have? Slowly, I reached out. Our fingers met, and the world dissolved around me. Visions flooded my mind, not like watching a movie, but like living memories that weren't my own. A settlement in the early 19th century. Families struggling through a harsh winter. Crops failing, children dying of hunger and disease. Desperation driving them to old ways, old gods. A circle of stones in a forest clearing. Blood on the snow as they sacrificed livestock, praying for the winter to end. Something stirring beneath the grove, awakened by their prayers and offerings. Ancient and hungry, neither good nor evil, simply other. Spring coming early that year, unnaturally warm and fertile. The settlers' joy turning to unease as they realized what they'd awakened couldn't be dismissed so easily. A pact made in fear and necessity. One life given each spring to ensure the others would thrive. A lottery held in secret. Elizabeth, barely 17, drawing the marked stone. Her terror as they led her to the grove. The knife. The blood. The earth opening to receive her. And after her, others. Year after year, the tradition continuing in secret even as the world changed around them. The burden passing from father to son, mother to daughter, the knowledge kept alive by a few. Until the sacrifices stopped in the mid-20th century, and the hunger below grew. The visions released me, and I found myself on my knees in the forest, gasping for breath. Elizabeth stood before me, her expression solemn. "Now you understand," she said. "The hunger has been building for decades. Miller is the last of his line. He believes if he doesn't feed it, something worse will happen." "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What's under the grove?" "We don't have names for such things anymore," she replied. "The settlers knew it as the Old One Beneath. Something that was here long before humans." A rustling sound came from nearby, followed by a flashlight beam cutting through the trees. "There you are." Ranger Miller's voice carried clearly through the darkness. "I told you, you can't escape the forest." Elizabeth vanished like mist and sunlight, leaving me alone as Miller emerged from between the trees. He had recovered his knife and now carried a flashlight as well. "Who are you talking to?" he demanded, sweeping his light around the empty forest. I stood shakily, mind racing with what I'd learned. "I know about the sacrifices," I said. "About Elizabeth Holloway and the others. About what's under the grove." He stiffened. "Then you understand why this has to happen." "No one has to die," I insisted. "Whatever's down there, there must be another way to appease it." "There isn't." He stepped closer, his face half illuminated by his flashlight. "My grandfather tried to end it in the 1950s. Thought modern ways had made the old traditions unnecessary. 3 years later, every child in town under the age of 10 died of a mysterious illness. Every crop failed. The lake turned red with algae." He shook his head. "He performed the ritual again the next spring. Everything returned to normal. That's when he understood some bargains can't be broken. But killing innocent people to save hundreds of others," he finished. "I don't enjoy this. I carry the burden so others don't have to know what keeps them safe." Despite everything, I could hear the genuine anguish in his voice. This wasn't a heartless killer, but a man trapped by a terrible legacy, believing he had no choice. "Let me try to find another way," I pleaded. "I'm a researcher. I have resources, colleagues. There might be records of similar phenomena elsewhere, solutions that were found." "It's too late for that," he interrupted, raising the knife. "The hunger has grown too strong. I can feel it pulling at me every day now, demanding to be fed. And you're here. The grove has chosen you." He lunged forward suddenly, the knife slashing toward me. I twisted away, the blade cutting through my jacket sleeve but missing my arm. Off balance, Miller stumbled forward, and I seized the opportunity to flee once more into the darkness. This time, however, I didn't run blindly. Elizabeth's visions had shown me the layout of these woods as they had been a century and a half ago. If the trails had remained similar, there might be a way back to the main path, and my car. Behind me, Miller crashed through the underbrush in pursuit. "Running only makes it worse," he shouted. "Face it with dignity, like Elizabeth did." I ignored him, focusing on finding landmarks that matched my borrowed memories. There, a lightning struck oak that had been old even in Elizabeth's time. I veered left, following what I hoped was the path to salvation. The forest fought me at every step. Roots seemed to rise from the ground to trip me, branches bent low to block my path, and twice I nearly ran headlong into trees that appeared suddenly in my way. The whispers returned, no longer just behind me but all around, rising from the earth itself. Cannot leave. Must stay. Must feed. Must join us. My foot caught in a tangle of roots, sending me sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand, not broken, but definitely sprained. I limped forward, each step agony, but driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. The path opened suddenly into another clearing, smaller than the whispering grove but clearly man-made. At its center stood a weathered stone altar, ancient and stained dark. I'd run in a circle. This was where it had all begun, the original sacrifice site, before the ritual had moved to the grove. And I wasn't alone. Standing around the clearing were the shadow figures from before, now fully materialized as people from different time periods, colonial settlers, Victorian-era townsfolk, people in early 20th century clothing, and more recent victims in modern attire. Dozens of them, all bearing the same hollow-eyed expression. Elizabeth stood among them, her spectral form more defined than the others. "I'm sorry," she said. "The forest controls the paths. It led you here." From behind me came Miller's voice, no longer breathless from pursuit but calm and ritualistic. "The circle closes. The chosen one returns to the sacred ground." I turned to face him, limping backward toward the stone altar. "This isn't right. You know it isn't." "Right and wrong don't matter here," he replied, advancing slowly. "Only necessity. Only survival." As he approached, knife raised, the spectral audience began to chant softly, "Feed the hunger. Save the thirst. Blood for blessing. Death for life." My back hit the cold stone of the altar. There was nowhere left to run. As Miller closed in, knife gleaming in the moonlight, time seemed to slow. The chanting of the spectral audience faded to a dull hum in my ears, replaced by the thunderous pounding of my own heartbeat. This couldn't be how my story ended, sacrificed in some ancient ritual by the last keeper of a terrible tradition. There had to be a way out, something I was missing. My academic mind, even in the grip of terror, refused to stop working. Everything I'd learned about folklore and ritual sacrifice over years of study raced through my consciousness. Rituals had rules, patterns, requirements. Wait. I held up my hand, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "The sacrifice has to be willing." Miller hesitated, the knife hovering in midair. "What did you say?" "In traditional sacrificial rites, the victim has to be willing," I continued, the words tumbling out as my mind pieced together fragments of knowledge. "Unwilling sacrifices taint the offering. They bring bad fortune, not blessing." It was a desperate gamble, based on common elements in European ritual practices, but I had no idea if it applied to whatever entity lurked beneath the grove. The spectral figures had gone silent, watching this exchange with hollow eyes that somehow managed to convey interest. Miller's face twitched, uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. "That's not how it works here." "Are you sure?" I pressed, sensing his doubt. "How many of your victims went willingly to their deaths? And has the hunger been satisfied? Or has it grown stronger with each sacrifice?" He didn't answer immediately, which told me everything. "I've studied ritual practices across cultures for years," I said, my confidence growing. "Force corrupts the sacrifice. It's why ancient societies often chose volunteers or used mind-altering substances to make victims compliant. A true sacrifice must be given freely." Elizabeth stepped forward from the spectral crowd. She speaks truth, keep her. None of us were willing, and the hunger has only grown. Miller's gaze darted between me and the ghosts. My father taught me the ritual as his father taught him. This is how it's always been done. And yet the entity beneath the growth grows more demanding, doesn't it? I challenged. When did it change from once a year to more frequent sacrifices? The pattern is failing because the ritual itself is flawed. A murmur spread through the ghostly audience, a ripple of agreement. Miller lowered the knife slightly. What are you suggesting? My mind raced ahead of my mouth. I had his attention, but what solution could I possibly offer that wouldn't end with my death? Then it struck me, perhaps the most dangerous gamble of all. Let me speak to it, I said. The entity beneath the growth. If I understand what it truly wants, maybe there's another way to satisfy it. Impossible, Miller scoffed. It doesn't speak. It only hungers. Has anyone ever tried? I countered. Or have you all been so focused on feeding it that you never question what it actually needs? The whispers around us intensified, but they had changed in character, no longer threatening but almost curious. Elizabeth moved closer, her spectral form floating inches above the ground. In all the years since my death, no one has ever attempted to communicate with what lies below. We simply accepted our fate as its food. Miller's internal struggle played across his face. Generations of tradition warred against the logic of my argument. Finally, he lowered the knife completely. How? He asked simply. I had no idea. I was improvising completely, playing for time. But as I stood there, surrounded by the spirits of past victims, a strange certainty formed in my mind. The altar, I said, looking at the ancient stone behind me. It's not just for sacrifice. It's a connection point, a door. The words felt right as I spoke them, though I had no logical basis for the claim. Something was guiding me, perhaps the collective knowledge of the spirits around us. I turned and placed both hands flat on the cold stone. It thrummed beneath my touch, a subtle vibration that traveled up my arms and into my chest. What do you want? I whispered to the stone. What do you need? For a moment, nothing happened. Then the vibration intensified, becoming a pulse that matched my heartbeat. The air around the altar shimmered, and the ground beneath my feet began to shift. Step back. Miller shouted, but I remained in place, hands pressed to the stone. The earth around the altar cracked open, soil and rocks falling away to reveal a yawning darkness below. But it wasn't a simple hole in the ground. The darkness moved, swirled, pulsated like something alive. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I fought it back. This was what I had asked for, a chance to communicate with whatever ancient entity had been trapped beneath this forest for centuries. To run now would mean death at Miller's hands or worse. I hear you, I said to the darkness. I want to understand. The swirling void seemed to pause, as if considering my words. Then, without warning, tendrils of darkness shot upward, wrapping around my arms like living shadows. I tried to pull away, but they held me fast, neither solid nor gaseous, but something in between. No! Miller lunged forward with the knife, but the spectral figures moved as one, forming a barrier between us. The tendrils pulled me closer to the opening, and panic surged through me. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was I simply offering myself as a more direct meal? As my face approached the swirling darkness, the world around me fell away. The clearing, the altar, Miller, the ghosts, all vanished. I hung suspended in an endless void, alone yet surrounded by a presence so vast it defied comprehension. It had no voice, yet somehow it spoke directly into my mind. So long, so hungry, so alone. The words carried emotions, ancient sadness, endless isolation, and yes, hunger, but not for flesh or blood. Something deeper, something more fundamental. Gathering my courage, I formed a response in my mind. Where are you? Images flooded my consciousness of being old as the earth itself, sleeping beneath the forest floor for eons. Neither malevolent nor benevolent, simply existing in dreamless slumber until the settler's desperate prayers had disturbed its rest. What do you want? I asked. More images, connection, recognition, remembrance. Not death, not blood, but acknowledgement of its existence. The sacrifices had been misunderstood, their fear and pain creating a barrier rather than a bridge. Each death had provided momentary awareness but left the entity more isolated than before. Understanding dawned like a physical sensation. This ancient being didn't want human sacrifice, it wanted human connection. The settlers, in their fear and limited understanding, had begun a tragic tradition based on fundamental misinterpretation. How can we help you? I asked. The response came not as words or images, but as a profound sense of yearning for stories, for memories, for the rich tapestry of human experience. The entity had been awakened to consciousness by human prayer, but then fed only fear and death for generations. It hungered for more. I understand now, I thought. Not blood. Stories. Memories. Connection. The presence seemed to pulse with excitement, the mental equivalent of an eager nod. With sudden clarity, I realized what needed to be done. The traditional ritual had it all wrong. The entity didn't want lives ended but lives shared. The spirits of the victims remained trapped in the forest not as punishment but because they were the only connection the entity had to the human world. As this realization solidified in my mind, the tendrils around my arms loosened and the void began to recede. I found myself back at the altar, gasping for breath as if I'd been underwater. Miller stood frozen in place, knife still in hand. The spectral figures watched expectantly. I know what it wants, I said, my voice hoarse. Not blood sacrifice. Not death. It wants connection. Stories. Memories. Elizabeth drifted forward. What are you saying? The entity beneath the grove is ancient, predating human settlement here. It was awakened by the settlers' prayers during that desperate winter, but it never wanted their deaths. It wanted their experiences, their stories, their humanity. I turned to Miller. Your ancestors misunderstood. They created a ritual of blood when what was needed was a ritual of memory. He looked skeptical. That goes against everything my family has maintained for generations. Because the first misunderstanding was never corrected, I explained. The entity accepted what was offered because it was better than nothing, but each sacrifice left it more isolated, more hungry for the right kind of connection. The whispers around us changed, becoming harmonious, almost musical. The spectral figures began to glow more brightly. It wants to release them, I said, gesturing to the ghosts. All of them. They've been held here not out of malice, but because they were the only connection it had to humanity. Miller lowered the knife completely, confusion evident on his face. If what you're saying is true, how do we fix this? I looked down at the crack in the earth, the swirling darkness still visible below. We give it what it truly wants. Not more death. A proper connection. Understanding what needed to be done, I knelt beside the opening and placed my hands on either side. I offer you my memories, freely given, my stories, my experiences, not my death, but my life. I close my eyes and open my mind, allowing my memories to flow, childhood joys and sorrows, academic achievements, loves and losses, the richness of a human life fully lived. Not just facts, but emotions, sensations, the complete tapestry of what it meant to be human. The darkness below stirred, tendrils rising once more. But this time, they didn't grasp or pull, they simply touched, connecting, receiving what was freely offered. A warm sensation spread through me, not unpleasant but strange, as if something was gently leafing through the pages of my life. I could feel the entity's growing understanding, its wonder at experiencing humanity from the inside rather than observing it through a veil of fear. One by one, the spectral figures began to approach the opening. Elizabeth was first, kneeling opposite me. I offer my memories as well, she said. Not in fear, but in friendship. The entity received her offering, and as it did, her spectral form began to change, the hollow darkness in her eyes filling with light, the bloodstains on her dress fading away. She looked at me with a smile of profound relief before her form dissolved into particles of light that drifted upward and vanished among the stars. The other spirits followed suit, each offering their memories freely, each finding release as the entity accepted their gift. As they departed, the forest around us seemed to lighten, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Finally, only Ranger Miller and I remained. He stared at the place where the ghosts had stood, his expression unreadable. My family has carried this burden for generations, he said softly. If what you're saying is true, we've been perpetuating a terrible mistake. You didn't know, I replied. None of you did. He approached the opening cautiously, then knelt beside it. I offer my memories as well, and those of my father and his father before him, passed down through our line. I offer our sorrow for the misunderstanding and our hope for a new beginning. The tendrils rose to meet him, touching his forehead gently. His face relaxed, decades of burden visibly lifting from his shoulders. As the entity accepted his offering, the crack in the earth began to close, the swirling darkness receding. But it didn't vanish completely. A small, glowing fissure remained in the stone of the altar, pulsing with gentle blue light. A doorway, I murmured. Not for sacrifice, but for communion. Miller looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time since I'd met him. What happens now? Now, I said, rising shakily to my feet, we create a new tradition. Dawn broke over Black Hollow Forest, pale light filtering through the canopy to illuminate the ancient altar. The night's horrors seemed distant now, like a nightmare fading in the morning light, except the small glowing fissure in the stone remained, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Miller and I sat on fallen logs nearby, exhausted but alive. Neither of us had spoken much since the spectral figures had departed, both processing the night's revelations in our own way. My grandfather used to have nightmares, Miller finally said, breaking the silence. He'd wake up screaming about the voices in the grove. I always thought it was guilt over the sacrifices. It was the entity trying to communicate, I replied. Trying to tell him there was another way. He nodded slowly. 3 generations of my family, carrying this burden. Believing we were protecting the town when we were perpetuating a cycle of unnecessary death. You couldn't have known, I said. The misunderstanding happened long before your time. The gentle pulsing from the fissure seemed to intensify, as if responding to our conversation. I approached the altar cautiously, placing my hand near the glowing crack. Warmth radiated from it, along with a sense of contentment. The malevolence of the previous night was gone, replaced by something almost friendly. "It's still there," I said. "Still connected to this place. But it's different now." Miller joined me at the altar. "What exactly happened last night? What is this thing?" I shook my head. "I'm not entirely sure. Something ancient. Something that existed here long before humans settled this land. Not evil, just other. It doesn't think like we do. It experiences reality differently. And it wants our stories, our memories. It wants connection," I explained. "Consciousness. Before the settlers awakened it with their desperate prayers, it existed in a state of dreamless sleep. Their ritual gave it awareness, but then fed it only fear and death. It's been trying to understand humanity ever since, but through a distorted lens." I ran my fingers lightly over the glowing fissure. "Now it has a proper connection. A way to experience human life without ending it." Miller looked troubled. "So what do we do now? I can't just ignore everything that's happened. People die because of my family's actions. We create a new tradition," I said firmly. "One of remembrance instead of sacrifice. The entity doesn't need blood, it needs stories, experiences, connection." An idea began forming in my mind. The Whispering Grove could become a place of community gathering rather than secret rituals. A place where people come to share important life events, celebrations, commemorations. "You think the townspeople would come here? After everything?" "They don't know about the sacrifices," I pointed out. "To them, this is just another part of the forest. With some work, the grove could be transformed into something beautiful rather than fearful." Miller considered this. "A memorial for the victims would be appropriate. Something to acknowledge what happened without revealing the whole truth. The families deserve that much. And regular visits," I added. "People coming to share their experiences with the entity, not in fear but in friendship. Keeping the connection alive so the hunger never returns." The sun had risen fully now, dappling the clearing with golden light. In the daylight, the ancient altar looked less ominous, just a weathered stone that had witnessed centuries of human history, both horrific and hopeful. "I should take you back to your campsite," Miller said. "Your equipment is still there." The walk back to the Whispering Grove was surreal. The forest that had seemed so malevolent at night now appeared ordinary, even beautiful in the morning light. Birds sang, squirrels darted between trees, and sunlight streamed through the canopy. Yet subtle changes were evident. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the whispers were gone. Even the shadows seemed normal, just natural darkness where sunlight couldn't reach. When we reached the grove, my tent stood undisturbed, exactly as I had left it in my panic the night before. My research equipment was scattered about, some of it damaged in my hasty flight. As I gathered my belongings, I noticed my digital recorder on the ground near the center of the clearing. I picked it up, surprised to find it still working. On impulse, I pressed play. The recording began with my initial observations about the grove, followed by long stretches of silence. Then, faintly but unmistakably, came the whispers I'd heard, dozens of overlapping voices speaking words that were now clearly audible. "Help us. Remember us. Tell our stories." Miller listened with me, his face solemn. "Evidence," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed, though not the kind I expected to find when I came here. I packed the recorder carefully with my other equipment. Whatever happened next, this recording would be crucial, proof not only of the supernatural events we'd experienced, but of the misunderstanding that had led to so many unnecessary deaths. As we prepared to leave the grove, I felt a presence behind me. Turning quickly, I saw Elizabeth standing at the edge of the clearing, not the hollow-eyed specter of the night before, but a luminous figure filled with peaceful light. "You freed us," she said simply. "Thank you." Miller stared at her in shock. "You're still here?" "I thought. Most have moved on," she explained. "But some of us chose to remain as guardians of this place, to help guide the new tradition." She approached us, her feet hovering slightly above the forest floor. "The entity has existed in darkness for so long. Now it knows light. Now it knows what connection truly means. Will you help us?" I asked. "Help us establish the new tradition?" She nodded. "That is why I stayed. To ensure the old ways are truly gone and the new ways take root." "The townspeople can't see you," Miller pointed out. Elizabeth smiled. "They don't need to. You will be our voice in their world. Both of you." I looked at Miller in surprise. "Both of us?" "You discovered the truth," she said to me, "but he knows this community. Together, you can change what this place means to them." Miller seemed taken aback. "I was planning to turn myself in. For what my family has done." "And accomplish what?" Elizabeth asked gently. "More suffering? More fear? The dead have forgiven you, Keeper. Now you must earn that forgiveness by creating something better from the ashes of the old tradition." She began to fade, her form becoming translucent in the morning light. "Come back at the full moon. Bring others who are willing to listen. Share your stories with the grove. Keep the connection alive, but through celebration and remembrance, not blood and fear." With those words, she vanished completely, leaving Miller and I alone in the clearing. We stood in silence for a long moment before he spoke. "She's right. Turning myself in wouldn't help anyone. The victims deserve justice, but not at the cost of revealing what lies beneath the grove. That knowledge could be dangerous in the wrong hands." I nodded slowly. "So we create the new tradition. We transform this place from one of secret horror to one of open remembrance. It won't be easy," he warned. "Some in town might resist any change to the forest, especially from outsiders." "Then we start small," I suggested. "A memorial for the lost hikers over the years. A place for reflection and remembrance. Over time, we can introduce the idea of the grove as a gathering place for community events." As we hiked back toward the forest entrance, plans began to take shape between us. By the time we reached my car, parked where I had left it just a day earlier, though it felt like a lifetime had passed, we had the outline of a new tradition that could heal the wounds of the past while protecting the truth about what lay beneath the grove. 1 month later, under the light of the full moon, a small group gathered in the Whispering Grove. Miller had convinced several community leaders and local historians that the clearing had historical significance worth preserving. I had contributed my academic credentials to lend legitimacy to the project, framing it as a study of local folklore and community memory. We had cleared the grove of underbrush and set up simple wooden benches in a circle. At the center, not far from where my tent had stood during that fateful night, we placed a memorial stone with the names of all those who had gone missing in Black Hollow Forest over the years, the victims of the old tradition, finally acknowledged publicly, if not in the full truth of their fate. That night, as moonlight filtered through the ancient oaks, we took turns sharing stories, personal memories, local legends, historical accounts of the area. With each tale told, The small fissure in the old altar stone, which we had carefully moved to the edge of the clearing, pulsed with soft blue light, visible only to those who knew to look for it. I watched the faces of the townspeople as they spoke, noticing how the atmosphere of the grove changed with each shared memory. No longer oppressive and frightening, the clearing now felt almost nurturing, as if the very air was drinking in the stories with appreciation. Miller caught my eye across the circle and gave a small nod. He felt it too, the entity beneath the grove, listening contently, connected to humanity through celebration rather than sacrifice. As the gathering concluded and people began to disperse, I lingered behind, drawn to the old altar stone. Placing my hand on the warm surface beside the glowing fissure, I whispered, "Is this what you wanted all along?" No audible response came, but a feeling of profound gratitude washed over me, not just from the entity below, but from somewhere all around us. At the edge of my vision, I glimpsed transparent figures among the trees, Elizabeth and the others who had chosen to remain as guardians, watching over the new tradition with approval. I had come to Black Hollow Forest seeking folklore and found truth far stranger than fiction. The Whispering Grove had claimed its final victim the night I arrived, not a human sacrifice, but the end of a tragic misunderstanding that had persisted for generations. Now, as I prepared to leave, to return to my academic life while periodically coming back to help maintain the new tradition, I understood that the forest's whispers would continue. But they would no longer be cries of anguish and hunger. They would be echoes of stories freely given, memories willingly shared, and connections forged between the human world and something ancient that had finally found what it truly needed. As I walked away from the grove for the last time that night, I could have sworn I heard a chorus of voices rising from the earth itself, not in threat or sorrow, but in a harmonious whisper of gratitude. Thank you for remembering us. What better way to lay restless spirits to sleep than to ensure they are never forgotten? What draws us to abandoned places? Is it curiosity, or something darker, something that whispers to the shadows within us? The cabin loomed before me, a decrepit structure half swallowed by the forest that had reclaimed the land around it. I'd heard rumors about this place during my research at the university. Local legend spoke of a recluse who practiced old ways here decades ago, before disappearing without a trace. As a doctoral candidate in anthropology specializing in occult practices across rural America, I couldn't resist the opportunity to investigate. My name is Daniel Mercer, 32 years old, with more academic knowledge than practical experience when it comes to the darker corners of folk religion. My colleagues called my research interests morbidly fascinating, but mostly harmless. I'd spent years studying ritualistic practices, but always from the safety of library archives and digital scans. The October air bit through my jacket as I approached the cabin. Wind whispered through the trees, creating a sound like distant voices engaged in hushed conversation. I paused at the threshold, my hand hovering over the rusted door handle. Something felt wrong. A heaviness hung in the air, an atmospheric pressure that seemed to push against my skin. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself, adjusting my glasses and shouldering my backpack. "It's just an old cabin." The door creaked open with surprising ease, as if inviting me in. Dust particles danced in the shafts of afternoon light that penetrated the grimy windows. The interior was sparse: a table, a chair, a fireplace, and shelves lined with jars of unidentifiable contents. Nothing particularly unusual for an abandoned rural dwelling. I set my backpack down and began documenting the space with my camera. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, each step releasing musty odors of decay and something else, a metallic scent I couldn't quite place. As I moved deeper into the cabin, the temperature seemed to drop noticeably. I rubbed my arms, attributing the chill to poor insulation and approaching evening. Yet something nagged at my perception, a feeling of being watched. I turned quickly several times, expecting to catch someone or something in my peripheral vision, but found only shadows. "Focus, Daniel," I whispered, my breath visible in the cold air. "You're here to do research, not ghost hunt." The back room held more promise. A small bedroom with a narrow cot and a weathered desk. Here, the metallic smell grew stronger. I approached the desk cautiously, noting deep scratches in the wood surface, as if someone had frantically carved messages with a knife. The drawers were locked, but the aged would give way easily when I applied pressure. Inside the bottom drawer lay a leather-bound book. The cover was stained dark brown with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. My heart quickened as I carefully lifted it out. This was exactly the kind of primary source material I'd been hoping to find, a potential ritualist's grimoire or journal. As my fingers touched the cover, a sharp pain shot through my thumb. I jerked back, noticing a small cut where the edge of a page had sliced my skin. A drop of blood welled up, falling onto the book's cover. The liquid didn't pool as expected, but seemed to sink into the leather, absorbed like water into parched soil. The room suddenly felt smaller. The shadows in the corners deepened, and for a moment I could have sworn they moved independently of any light source. A low sound, just at the threshold of hearing, hummed through the cabin, not quite a voice, but something with the cadence of speech. I should have left then. Everything about this situation triggered warnings in my mind. But academic curiosity overrode my instincts. This book could be the cornerstone of my dissertation, proof that isolated practitioners had developed their own syncretic ritual systems outside of established occult traditions. I opened the cover carefully, and my breath caught in my throat. The pages were not paper but something thinner, almost translucent. The text was written in a fine, cramped hand, not with ink, but with what appeared to be dried blood. Each page was filled with detailed ritual instructions, diagrams of complex symbols, and personal observations. The first entry was dated April 18, 1978. The boundary is thinner here than anywhere I've found. I can hear them whispering from the other side. They're hungry for connection, for vessels, for blood. I will be their gateway. I will give them form. As I read these words aloud, the humming sound intensified. The air around me seemed to vibrate, and the shadows in the corners pulsed like living things. My research had exposed me to countless accounts of supernatural phenomena, but I'd always approached them with academic detachment, seeing them as cultural constructs rather than literal truths. Now, as the temperature plummeted further and the metallic smell became overwhelming, I wasn't so certain. I closed the book quickly, but not before noticing that my blood had spread across the first page, tracing the written symbols as if drawn by an invisible hand. The cut on my thumb throbbed painfully. "This is impossible," I said, my voice sounding strange in the thick air of the cabin. "There has to be a rational explanation." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, certain I would catch the prankster who must be orchestrating these effects, but the doorway remained empty. Empty except for a shadow that didn't match the contours of the room, a shadow that seemed to stand upright for a moment before melting back into the general darkness. My heart hammered in my chest. I needed to leave, to process what I was seeing in the safety of daylight and rational company. But as I moved to put the book back, something stopped me. My dissertation. My research. This book was too valuable to leave behind. I slipped it into my backpack with trembling hands, trying to ignore how the leather seemed to warm in my touch, how it felt almost like skin beneath my fingers. The cabin's atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive as I packed up my equipment. The creaking sounds no longer corresponded to my movements, and the shadows seemed to reach toward me while I wasn't looking directly at them. I hurried my pace, suddenly desperate to escape. As I reached for the front door, a whisper emanated from directly behind me, a voice both ancient and intimate, speaking words I couldn't understand but somehow recognized. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the fading daylight, gasping as if I'd been underwater. The forest around the cabin had grown darker, the trees more densely packed than I remembered. Had I spent more time inside than I thought? The sun was setting, casting long shadows that pointed like accusing fingers back toward the cabin. I hurried to my car, tossing my backpack onto the passenger seat and starting the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the cabin doorway, a silhouette too tall and too thin to be human, with limbs at impossible angles. Then it was gone, and I was alone on the forest road, with nothing but the book and the lingering smell of blood to remind me of what I'd experienced. That night, in my small apartment, I convinced myself I'd been affected by the power of suggestion and the atmospheric conditions of the abandoned cabin. The book, however, was undeniably real. I placed it on my desk, planning to examine it properly in the morning. I dreamed of whispers and shadows, of blood-forming symbols on my skin, of a presence watching me from the corner of my bedroom. When I woke, gasping and sweating, I found the book open on my nightstand, though I was certain I'd left it on my desk. The page it displayed contained a simple message that hadn't been there before. The gateway opens. I am coming through. And below it, my own blood had formed a perfect replica of the symbol drawn in the book, a symbol I now wore as a wound on the palm of my hand. Have you ever felt the sensation of something ancient awakening inside you? Like a forgotten memory suddenly stirring in the darkest corner of your mind? I stared at the symbol carved into my palm, the skin raised and red as if branded. It matched exactly the one on the page, a complex pattern of interconnected lines forming what looked like eyes surrounded by thorns. I hadn't done this to myself. I couldn't have. This isn't happening, I whispered, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet apartment. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the ritualist's book. In daylight, it seemed less menacing, just old leather and stained pages. But the mark on my hand was undeniable. I called the university to say I was taking a sick day, then sat at my desk with the book before me. Academic training took over. If I couldn't explain what was happening, I could at least document it. I set up my laptop and began photographing each page methodically, creating a digital record. The journal belonged to someone named Thomas Blackwell, a former anthropology professor who had abandoned his academic career in the late 60s to pursue what he called practical applications of ritual knowledge. The entries detailed his growing obsession with creating a bridge between our world and what he described as the Shadow Realm, a place of disembodied consciousness and ancient entities. As I worked, the apartment grew increasingly cold. The sun had risen fully outside, but inside, shadows seemed to linger in corners where they shouldn't exist. Twice I caught movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. The cuts on my thumb and palm throbbed in unison, like a second heartbeat. By noon, I documented half the journal. Blackwell's writings became increasingly disturbed as they progressed. He wrote about sacrificing small animals to feed the gateway, about hearing voices instructing him on new rituals, about carving symbols into his own flesh to become a worthy vessel. I paused at an entry that made my blood run cold. The blood is the key. They can only cross over through blood willingly given. Each drop strengthens the connection. Each symbol transcribed in blood becomes a tether, binding their world to ours. I've offered mine for months, but I need more. Fresh blood. Different blood. The ritual requires diversity of vessels. I touched the wound on my palm. My blood on his book. A tether, binding their world to ours. The apartment phone rang, startling me so badly that I knocked over my coffee. As I mopped up the spill, the answering machine clicked on. It was my colleague, Professor Eleanor Wright. "Daniel, I've been trying your cell. Listen, I found some disturbing information about the cabin you're researching. The owner, Thomas Blackwell, didn't just disappear. According to county records, he died there in 1979. They found him. Well, it's not pleasant. Call me back as soon as you can." The machine clicked off, and in the sudden silence, I could hear a faint whisper coming from somewhere in the apartment. I froze, straining to listen. It sounded like my name, repeated over and over in a voice that wasn't quite human. I forced myself to continue working, to maintain the pretense of academic detachment. The next pages of the journal contained elaborate ritual diagrams, circles of protection, summoning configurations, and detailed instructions for what Blackwell called the final invocation. Once enough blood has been offered and enough symbols have been transcribed, the guardian of the gateway will manifest. It will seek to complete the connection by claiming a vessel. I have prepared myself to be that vessel. When the guardian wears my flesh, the shadow realm and our world will merge. My head throbbed painfully, and my vision blurred around the edges. The whispers grew louder, no longer coming from a specific direction, but seeming to emanate from the air itself. I could almost understand them now, promises, enticements, warnings. I needed expert help. I reached for my phone to call Eleanor back, but as my fingers touched it, the screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "He was unworthy. You will suffice." The phone grew scorching hot. I dropped it with a cry, watching as the screen cracked from the heat. Black smoke curled from the device, forming momentary patterns that looked disturbingly like the symbols in Blackwell's journal. That was enough. I slammed the book shut and grabbed my jacket. I needed to get out of the apartment, to think clearly away from whatever influence was gathering there. As I reached the door, a framed photograph fell from the wall, shattering on the floor. I hesitated, then bent to pick up the image, a picture of me at my graduate school ceremony. In the photo, standing just behind me, was a figure I didn't recognize. Tall and gaunt, with features that seemed to blur when I tried to focus on them. A figure that hadn't been there when the picture was taken. I ran. The university campus was alive with activity, students moving between classes, lounging on the quad, exemplifying normal life. I headed straight for the anthropology department, hoping to find Eleanor. Her office door was closed, but a note indicated she was in the rare books collection in the library basement. The library basement was cool and quiet, the air heavy with the smell of old paper and preservation chemicals. Rows of compact shelving created a labyrinth of narrow corridors. I wound my way through them, calling Eleanor's name softly. "Daniel? Is that you?" Her voice echoed from somewhere ahead. "I'm in the restricted section." I found her surrounded by open books and file folders, her gray hair escaping from its usual neat bun. Eleanor was in her 60s, a respected scholar of religious practices with a particular interest in the occult. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening, it was her. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Did you get my message?" I did. I sank into a chair opposite her desk. "Eleanor, something's happening that I can't explain." I showed her my palm and told her everything: the cabin, the book, the whispers, the changing photograph. To her credit, she didn't immediately suggest psychiatric evaluation, though I could see the concern in her eyes. "Let me see the book," she said finally. I reached into my bag, then froze. In my haste to leave the apartment, I'd left the journal on my desk. "It's at home," I said, "but I took photographs." I handed her my laptop. Eleanor scrolled through the images, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Daniel, do you know what you found? This is a Liber Umbrarum, a book of shadows. Not the modern Wiccan kind, but the original concept. A book that serves as a gateway between worlds." She pointed to certain symbols. "These are ancient, pre-Christian. They appear in various forms across multiple cultures, always associated with threshold guardians and liminal spaces." "You're saying it's real?" "That Blackwell actually found a way to, what? Communicate with another dimension?" "I'm saying that belief is a powerful thing," she replied carefully. "Throughout history, people who thoroughly believed in ritual magic sometimes experienced remarkable phenomena. Whether those phenomena were supernatural or psychological doesn't change their impact." She turned to a file on her desk. "This is what I wanted to show you. The police report on Blackwell's death." She handed me several photocopied pages. The report was clinical but disturbing. Blackwell had been found in the cabin, his body covered in self-inflicted cuts forming ritual symbols. He had apparently died from blood loss, but the investigating officer noted several unexplainable anomalies at the scene: temperature readings significantly below ambient conditions, electronic equipment failure, and most disturbingly, bloody footprints that began in the middle of the room and led to the door, then disappeared. "The cabin was sealed afterward," Eleanor continued. "It became university property when Blackwell died intestate, but no one wanted to deal with it. Eventually, it was just forgotten. Until I found it," I said quietly. Eleanor looked at me intently. "Daniel, I need you to listen carefully. If even half of what Blackwell wrote is true, you've initiated a ritual by bleeding on that book. You've created what occultists call a sympathetic link. How do I break it? Traditional methods would include purification rituals, spiritual cleansing, destruction of the linked object." A thunderous crash interrupted her as the lights flickered and went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Emergency lights came on moments later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. "Power surge," Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly. I could see my breath forming clouds in the crimson light. The cut on my palm burned like fire. "It followed me," I whispered. Eleanor stood quickly. "We need to leave." As we moved toward the door, the shelves began to shake, books tumbling to the floor around us. And then I heard it again, the whispering, louder now, a chorus of voices speaking in unison from every direction. One of the fallen books caught my attention. It had opened to a page displaying an illustration of a tall, emaciated figure with elongated limbs and a face composed of shadows. Beneath it was the caption, "The Guardian of the Threshold," depicted in a 16th century grimoire. It was the figure from my photograph. The figure I'd glimpsed in the cabin doorway. "Run!" Eleanor shouted, pushing me toward the exit. We burst through the library doors into the late afternoon sunlight. Behind us, the library windows darkened as if a cloud had passed over the sun, though the sky remained clear. "My office," Eleanor said, pulling me across the quad. "I have materials there that might help." As we hurried across campus, I noticed people turning to stare at us. No, not at us, at something behind us. I didn't dare look back. Eleanor's office was cluttered with books, artifacts, and stacks of papers. She locked the door behind us and immediately began pulling books from her shelves. "We need to sever the connection," she said, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. "The book is the anchor point, but your blood is the conductor. The symbol on your palm is a receiving mark." "Receiving what?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "The Guardian," she said grimly. "Blackwell tried to become its vessel but failed. Now it's trying again, using you." Outside the window, clouds gathered with unnatural speed, darkening the sky. The wind rose, howling around the building like a living thing. "Here," Eleanor said, showing me a page. "A banishing ritual. It's not specific to this entity, but it might buy us time." She cleared space on her desk and drew a circle with chalk. Inside it, she marked the cardinal points and placed candles at each one. "Stand in the center," she instructed. As I stepped into the circle, the cut on my palm split open, blood flowing freely. The symbol seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart. Eleanor began reciting words in a language I didn't recognize, her voice strong and commanding. The candles flared unnaturally bright, and for a moment, I felt something lift from me, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Then the window shattered inward, showering us with glass. The wind extinguished the candles and scattered Eleanor's papers. In the darkness, something moved, a deeper shadow within the shadows, unfolding itself like origami in reverse. The Guardian had found us. Eleanor pushed me behind her, continuing the ritual from memory, her voice never faltering. The shadow paused, seeming to consider her. Then it moved with impossible speed, flowing across the room like liquid darkness. It passed through Eleanor as if she were made of mist. She gasped, her eyes widening in shock, and collapsed to the floor. "Eleanor!" I reached for her, but her skin was already growing cold. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, her mouth frozen in an expression of terrible recognition. The shadow coalesced before me, gradually taking form. It resembled a human silhouette, but wrong, too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions. Where its face should have been was only darkness, with 2 points of light like distant stars. It reached for me with arms that stretched and distorted. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bookshelf that fell between us. I used the momentary barrier to bolt for the door, fumbling with the lock as the shadow flowed around the obstacle. I ran through the darkened halls of the anthropology building, the entity pursuing me with unhurried confidence. It didn't need to rush. Somehow, I knew it could find me anywhere now. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the campus in strobing flashes. In one of those flashes, I saw other shadows moving across the quad, misshapen and fluid, converging on the building. The gateway was opening, and I had been the key that unlocked it. Do you know what it feels like to be hunted by something that shouldn't exist? To feel it reaching for you through walls, through distance, through the very fabric of reality? I drove recklessly through the storm, raindrops hammering against the windshield like desperate fingers seeking entry. My hands shook on the steering wheel, blood from my palm smearing across the leather. In the rearview mirror, the university disappeared into the darkness, but I couldn't shake the certainty that I wasn't alone in the car. Eleanor was dead. The thought kept repeating in my mind, a horrific mantra I couldn't silence. She had died trying to help me, to stop whatever was happening. And I had run. Logic insisted I go to the police, but what would I tell them? That an anthropology professor had been killed by a shadow from another dimension? That I had accidentally initiated an occult ritual by bleeding on an old book? No, this was beyond conventional help. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, and there was only one source of information I had access to: the journal. The storm intensified as I approached my apartment building. Lightning struck nearby, the thunder so immediate and powerful that my car shuddered. For a moment, the flash illuminated the road ahead, and I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt. Standing in the middle of the street was a figure visible only in silhouette, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It didn't move as I skidded toward it, didn't react as my headlights swept across it. And then the lightning faded, and there was nothing there. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. "It's not real," I whispered. "It can't be real." But Eleanor's lifeless eyes told a different story. I parked in the underground garage of my building, the concrete space eerily empty. Water dripped from pipes overhead, the sound echoing metallically. Each step I took toward the elevator reverberated, as if something was matching my pace just out of sight. The elevator doors opened with a cheerful ding that seemed obscene in the context of my terror. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the 5th floor, then repeatedly jabbed the closed door button until the elevator mercifully sealed me in. As the elevator ascended, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely for 3 terrifying seconds before sputtering back to life. In those seconds of darkness, I felt hot breath on the back of my neck, heard a whisper directly in my ear. "Vessel." I pressed myself into the corner of the elevator, heart thundering in my chest. When the doors finally opened on my floor, I bolted down the hallway to my apartment. The door was ajar. I was certain I had locked it when I left. Absolutely certain. I pushed it open slowly. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of my laptop screen, still open on the desk where I'd left it. And sitting before it, illuminated in the electronic light, was the journal. But something was wrong. The book lay open, and the pages were turning slowly, one by one, as if an invisible hand was leafing through them. The movements weren't mechanical or regular, but curious, searching. Each page turned with deliberate care, pausing as if to examine the contents before moving on. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching this impossible scene unfold. The air in the apartment was frigid, my breath forming clouds that hung suspended before dissipating. The metallic smell from the cabin was stronger here, overwhelming. As the last page turned, the book slammed shut with such force that it jumped on the desk. Then slowly, deliberately, it rotated until its spine was aligned perfectly with the edge of the desk, as if placed there by someone with an obsessive attention to detail. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to flee, to never come back. But where would I go? The thing, the Guardian, had found me at the university across town. It had appeared on the road ahead of me. It had whispered in my ear in a sealed elevator. There was nowhere to hide. And I needed that book if I was going to understand how to stop this. I stepped into the apartment and closed the door behind me, throwing the deadbolt as if that could keep out something that moved through shadows. "I know you're here," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "What do you want from me?" No response came, but the laptop screen flickered, displaying a blank document. As I watched, words began to appear, one by one, as if typed by invisible hands. "You opened the door. You offered the blood. You will be the vessel." I approached the desk cautiously. I didn't know what I was doing. It was an accident. More words appeared. There are no accidents in blood ritual. The book called to you. You answered. What are you? I asked. I am the guardian, the keeper of the threshold, the one who waits between worlds. What happened to Thomas Blackwell? He was impure, unworthy. His flesh rejected me. I swallowed hard. And Eleanor? The woman attempted to close what you have opened. She interfered with the ritual. She paid the price. Anger flared through my fear. You killed her. I removed an obstacle, as I will remove all obstacles. The laptop screen went dark. In its reflection, I caught a glimpse of movement behind me. I spun around, but the apartment appeared empty, yet the sense of a presence had intensified, as if the very air had thickened with malevolent intent. My hand throbbed painfully. The symbol carved into my palm had darkened, the lines now black against my skin, as if filled with ink. Or something darker. I grabbed the journal and retreated to the bathroom, the only room in the apartment with a lock. For what little good it would do, it gave me a psychological barrier, a moment to think. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I examined my palm more carefully. The symbol wasn't just darker, it had changed subtly, additional lines appearing like roots spreading beneath skin. I could feel a pulse in it separate from my heartbeat, something alien flowing through my veins. I opened the journal to the final pages, where Blackwell described his last ritual. The Guardian requires a vessel prepared through specific ritual marks. Each symbol must be transcribed in blood, creating a map that allows the entity to navigate our physical dimension. The final mark, the Eye of the Threshold, must be carved into the flesh of the vessel at the moment of crossing. My palm burned at the words, as if in recognition. I have prepared for months, weakening the boundary between worlds, offering blood sacrifices to the Guardian. Tonight, at the dark of the moon, I will complete the final ritual. I will offer myself as the vessel. I will become the gateway incarnate. But Blackwell had failed. His flesh rejected me, the Guardian had written. What did that mean? I flipped forward, hoping for more information, but the next several pages were blank. Then, on the very last page, written in a shaky hand different from the meticulous script before. It's inside me, but I'm fighting it. The pain is beyond description. My body is rejecting the transformation because I am not the one it seeks. I was wrong. The ritual doesn't call the Guardian to any willing vessel. It calls a specific vessel to the Guardian. Someone chosen. Someone marked from birth. Not me. If you're reading this, and the book has found its way to you, run. It's already too late, but run anyway. The implication was clear. The book hadn't fallen into my hands by chance. It had been waiting for me. A heavy thud from outside the bathroom made me jump. Something struck the door, not a knock but an impact, as if someone had thrown their body against it. The door shuddered in its frame. Another impact, though it cracked slightly around the lock. I backed away, clutching the journal to my chest. My eyes darted around the small room, searching for a weapon, an escape, anything. The shower curtain billowed suddenly, though there was no draft. Behind it, visible through the translucent plastic, a shape began to form, taller than any human, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at. It moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, as if it hadn't quite figured out how physical bodies were supposed to work. A third impact splintered the bathroom door. Through the cracks, darkness seeped in like black smoke, coalescing into reaching tendrils. I was trapped between two manifestations of the same entity, closing in from both sides. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my mind racing. The journal had said there was no escape, but there had to be a way. Every ritual had rules, limitations. The shower curtains were open. Behind it stood not the guardian but Thomas Blackwell, or what remained of him. His body was desiccated, mummified, covered in ritual scars that formed symbols like the one on my palm. His eyes were gone, leaving empty sockets that leaked a black, tar-like substance. When he opened his mouth, more of the black fluid poured out. "You can't fight it," Blackwell's corpse said, his voice a dry rasp. "But you can control it. The ritual works both ways. The vessel contains the guardian, but also commands it." The bathroom door exploded inward, splinters flying like shrapnel. The shadow entity flowed in, filling the small space with suffocating darkness. "The book," Blackwell's corpse rasped urgently. "Use the book." I opened the journal, turning frantically to the ritual diagrams. One caught my eye, a binding circle inscribed with the same symbol that marked my palm. The shadows surrounded me, pressing against my skin like ice. I could feel it seeking entry through my eyes, my mouth, the cut on my palm. I thrust the open journal forward, pressing my bleeding hand against the diagram. "I am the vessel," I said, the words coming to me as if from memory, though I never read them. "I am the gateway. I am the master of the threshold." The shadow recoiled momentarily, then surged forward with renewed force. The pressure against my mind intensified, although far older and stronger than mine, seeking dominance. Blackwell's corpse reached out, his desiccated hand closing around my wrist. "Complete the circle," he urged. "With my blood and yours, seal the binding." His touch burned like acid. I tried to pull away, but his grip was supernaturally strong. The black fluid from his eyes dripped onto the journal, sizzling where it touched the page. Where it mingled with my blood, the diagram began to glow with an unhealthy light. The shadow entity howled, a sound not heard with ears but felt in the marrow of bones. It thrashed wildly, the bathroom mirror cracking from floor to ceiling, pipes bursting in the walls, spraying water that turned black where the shadow touched it. "Speak the words," Blackwell commanded. "Claim mastery." But I hesitated. Something wasn't right. Blackwell's expression was too eager, too hungry. The shadow's frenzy seemed performative, theatrical. I looked down at the journal again, at the binding ritual, and noticed details I'd missed before. The diagram wasn't meant to bind the guardian, it was meant to bind the vessel. To make the host subservient to the entity. They were working together, Blackwell and the guardian, tricking me into completing the ritual Blackwell had failed to fully execute. With sudden clarity, I understood. Blackwell hadn't been rejected as a vessel. He had fought back at the last moment, preventing the guardian from fully manifesting. His body had died, but part of him had remained, trapped in the liminal space between worlds, neither fully human nor fully absorbed by the entity. Now they both wanted release. The guardian wanted full manifestation, and Blackwell wanted an end to his half-existence. And I was the key to both. "No," I said, pulling my hand away from the diagram. "I reject you. I reject this ritual." The corpse's face contorted with rage. "Fool! You cannot reject what is already inside you. The process has begun." He was right. The symbol on my palm now covered my entire hand, black lines spreading up my wrist, crawling beneath my skin like living things. I could feel the guardian's presence in my mind, thoughts that weren't mine filtering through my consciousness, ancient, alien perspectives that made my sanity fray at the edges. The bathroom dissolved around me, reality giving way to something else, a liminal space between dimensions. Blackwell's corpse evaporated into shadow, joining with the larger entity. Together, they surrounded me, pressing in from all sides. In this place between worlds, I saw the truth. The Guardian wasn't a singular entity but a collective consciousness, the accumulated psychic energy of countless rituals performed across centuries. And Blackwell hadn't discovered the ritual, he had been guided to it by the entity, just as I had been. We were both pawns in a game older than human civilization. But pawns could become players if they understood the rules. I clutched the journal tightly, focusing on what Eleanor had told me. The book was the anchor point. My blood was the conductor. If I could break either connection, I might be able to stop this. In this liminal space, physical laws meant nothing, but symbolic ones held tremendous power. The journal in my hands began to burn, not with physical fire but with spiritual energy, the accumulated power of blood sacrifices made to keep the gateway open. You cannot destroy what belongs to the shadows, the merged entity of Blackwell and the Guardian hissed, their voices overlapping in terrible harmony. This doesn't belong to you, I countered. It belongs to me now. I claimed it with my blood. I focused all my will on the journal, imagining the pages crumbling to dust, the binding unraveling, the anchor point dissolving. The book shuddered in my hands, resisting, but I could feel something giving way, a weakening in the connection. The entity shrieked and lunged for me, clawed shadows tearing at my clothes, my skin, trying to wrest the book from my grasp. Pain lanced through me as the symbol on my palm burned like molten metal, spreading further up my arm. You're too late, it whispered in 1,000 voices. The threshold is crossed. The vessel is claimed. Darkness crawled up my neck, over my face, into my eyes. I could feel it inside me now, flooding my consciousness with alien thoughts and memories, rituals performed in ancient caves by early humans, blood sacrifices under stone circles, modern occultists unknowingly feeding the same entity with their dabbling. My grip on reality slipped. I was losing myself, being subsumed by the collective consciousness of the Guardian. With my last fragment of independent will, I brought the journal to my bleeding palm and pressed it hard against the symbol there. If you want a vessel, I gasped, take this one instead. I pushed every drop of my blood, my essence, myself into the book, creating a new connection, offering the journal as an alternative vessel for the entity that sought to claim me. For one eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the book began to change, the leather cover growing moist and warm, pulsating like living tissue. The pages darkened, the writing crawling across them like insects rearranging themselves into new patterns. The entity hesitated, caught between the vessel it had chosen and the one I offered. In that moment of indecision, I felt its grip on me weaken slightly. It was enough. With a final surge of will, I tore myself away, mentally and physically separating from both the entity and the journal. The symbol on my palm flared with agonizing heat, then began to fade, the black lines receding like tide marks. The journal, however, continued its grotesque transformation. The cover stretched and folded, taking on features, a mouth, eyes, limbs emerging from the binding. The pages ruffled and spread like feathers or scales. The thing that had been a book and was now becoming something else writhed in my hands. I dropped it, watching as it continued to change, absorbing the essence of the Guardian, becoming a physical manifestation of the entity. The liminal space around us wavered, reality reasserting itself. I found myself back in my destroyed bathroom, kneeling amid broken glass and pooling water. Before me lay not a book but a creature, something between insect and reptile, with too many limbs and eyes that reflected nothing. It looked at me with terrible recognition, its mouth opening to reveal pages where teeth should be. "This is not the end," it said in Blackwell's voice. "The ritual cannot be undone, only redirected. What has been opened cannot be fully closed." Then it scuttled away with unnatural speed, disappearing through the shattered door. I collapsed, exhausted beyond measure. The symbol on my palm had faded to a faint scar, but I could still feel something inside me, a shadow of the Guardian's presence, a thread connecting me to whatever the journal had become. I had not destroyed the entity. I had merely changed its form, given it a physical vessel other than myself. And in doing so, I have released it into the world. What had I done? Have you ever created a monster? Not metaphorically, but literally brought something terrible into existence through your own actions? 3 days after my confrontation with the Guardian, I sat in a dingy motel room 30 miles from campus, surrounded by printouts of Blackwell's journal, newspaper articles about ritualistic deaths spanning 4 decades, and maps marked with locations of reported shadow sightings. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since fleeing my apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thing the journal had become, that chitinous, many-limbed horror with pages for teeth. I saw Eleanor's lifeless body. I saw the black tendrils spreading under my skin. The symbol on my palm had faded to a silvery scar, but it still pulsed occasionally with phantom pain, particularly at sunset and sunrise, threshold times, as Blackwell had called them in his writings. The connection remained, weakened but not broken. My phone rang, startling me. The screen showed unknown caller. I hesitated, then answered. "Daniel Mercer?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Who's asking?" "My name is Michael Wayland. I'm with the university's Special Collections Department. I understand you checked out some materials relating to Thomas Blackwell." My heart rate quickened. I hadn't checked out anything officially, and Eleanor. "I didn't," I said cautiously. A pause. Professor Wright accessed them before her accident. Her notes indicated she was helping you with research. Accident. That's what they were calling it. I'd seen the news reports. Respected anthropology professor found dead in her office, apparent heart attack. No mention of the shattered window, the unnatural cold, the look of terror frozen on her face. "What do you want, Mr. Wayland?" "I have information about Blackwell you might find relevant to your situation." His emphasis on situation made it clear he knew more than he should. But I prefer to discuss it in person. Every instinct warned against meeting this stranger, but I was desperate for answers. "Where and when?" "St. Michael's Cemetery. The old section. 1 hour. "A cemetery? Seriously?" "Consecrated ground," Wayland replied simply. "There are fewer shadows." He hung up. I arrived at the cemetery as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the weathered headstones. The old section was separated from the newer graves by a low stone wall covered in lichen. Beyond it, crumbling monuments and mausoleums created a miniature city of the dead. A lone figure stood beside an ornate tomb, his face hidden by the brim of a hat. As I approached, he turned. Michael Wayland was older than his voice had suggested, perhaps in his 70s, with a deeply lined face and alert eyes. "Mr. Mercer," he said, extending his hand, then withdrawing it when he noticed my hesitation. "Thank you for coming. You said you have information about Blackwell." Wayland nodded toward the tomb beside us. "Thomas Blackwell? Or what they buried of him?" I looked at the name engraved on the marble. Thomas Edward Blackwell, 1930 to 1979. Below it, a warning, let the seeker beware the threshold. You knew him, I said, studying Wayland's face. I was his student, much as you were Eleanor's. Sadness flickered across his features. History repeats itself, Mr. Mercer. Blackwell found the book, just as you did. He bled on it, just as you did. He awakened something, just as you did. The Guardian. Wayland's expression tightened. That's what it calls itself. A misleading name. It doesn't guard anything, it hunts. It feeds on liminal energy, on the potential created at thresholds between states of being. What states of being? Life and death. Waking and sleeping. Sanity and madness. Wayland tapped his temple. All the boundaries we cross in our existence. What does it want? To dissolve those boundaries. To create a world without thresholds, where all states exist simultaneously. Chaos, in simplest terms. The cemetery had grown darker, the shadows between the graves deeper than they should have been. The scar on my palm throbbed in time with my heartbeat. You said Blackwell found the book. Where did it come from originally? Wayland smiled grimly. That's the question, isn't it? The answer depends on whether you believe the book created the Guardian or the Guardian created the book. Speak plainly, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Eleanor is dead because of this thing. I need to know how to stop it. You can't stop it, Wayland said flatly. Not completely. But you can bind it, contain it, as others have done before you. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay an antique silver dagger with inscriptions along its blade. This was used in the binding ritual performed after Blackwell's death, Wayland explained. The circle contained the Guardian temporarily, but the book was lost in the confusion. We searched for years, knowing it would eventually find its way to another potential vessel. To you. I eyed the dagger skeptically. And what am I supposed to do with this? Stab a book? No. You must find what the book has become and perform the binding ritual. The inscriptions contain the words of power. And if I refuse? Wayland's gaze hardened. Then the entity continues to grow stronger, feeding on liminal energy, creating more thresholds to cross. Have you watched the news lately, Mr. Mercer? 3 unexplained deaths in the county since Eleanor. All at threshold times, sunset, midnight, dawn. All with witnesses reporting strange shadows. Ice formed in the pit of my stomach. It's killing people. It's feeding. Each death creates a new threshold, the ultimate boundary between life and non-life. I took the box with the dagger, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. How do I find it? You're connected to it. Use that connection. Wayland touched my scarred palm lightly. The symbol isn't just a mark of possession, it's a tether. It binds you to the Guardian, but it also binds the Guardian to you. As if in response, the scar flared with sudden pain. I gasped, doubling over as images flashed through my mind, a dark place, damp stone, the smell of earth and decay. An underground place where shadows gathered. You feel it, Wayland said, not a question. I straightened, the pain subsiding. The old tunnels beneath the university. The maintenance passages from when it was a hospital. Wayland nodded. The Guardian seeks places of transition, of liminality. A structure that has changed purpose, that exists between identities. How do I perform the ritual? The dagger bears the instructions. But you'll need help. The ritual requires at least 2 participants. I'm too old to face this thing again, but there are others who understand what's at stake. He handed me a card with an address. Go there tomorrow at noon. Ask for Catherine. She'll assemble what you need. As we walked back through the cemetery, I noticed how the shadows seemed to avoid Wayland, bending away from him as if repelled. What are you telling me? I asked. He stopped, considering me with tired eyes. The binding isn't permanent. It never is. The guardian always finds a way back, always finds a new vessel. This has been happening for centuries, Mr. Mercer. We're just the latest custodians in a very long battle. Then what's the point? Why fight it? Because the alternative is worse. Left unchecked, the Guardian would dissolve all boundaries, all thresholds. Imagine a world where dreams and reality are indistinguishable, where life and death occur simultaneously, where every possibility exists at once. The human mind cannot survive such chaos. I thought of Eleanor, of the 3 others who had died since. I'll do it. Wayland clasped my shoulder. Be careful, Daniel. The Guardian knows your mind now. It will use your fears, your desires, your memories against you. We parted ways at the cemetery gate. As I walked to my car, I glanced back to see Wayland standing motionless, watching me. For an instant, as headlights from a passing car swept across him, his shadow seemed wrong, too angular, too tall. Then the light passed, and he was just an old man in a cemetery, guarding secrets I was only beginning to understand. The address Wayland had given me led to a bookstore specializing in occult literature, nestled between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store in the Arts District. Threshold Books, the sign read, and below it, we bridged the gap. Catherine turned out to be a woman in her 40s with prematurely silver hair and piercing green eyes. She took one look at my scarred palm and ushered me into a back room lined with locked cabinets. Michael called ahead, she said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. We don't have much time. The entity is growing stronger with each feeding. If it consumes enough liminal energy, it will break free of its physical vessel and become fully incorporeal again. And that's bad because then it can't be bound, she explained, unlocking a cabinet with a complex sequence of keys. It can only be contained when it inhabits a physical form, the book, initially, and now whatever the book has become. From the cabinet, she withdrew several items, candles made of black wax, a silver chalice, a pouch of herbs, and a worn leather case containing pieces of chalk in various colors. You'll need these for the binding ritual, she said, placing them in a canvas bag. The chalk is for drawing the containment circle. The candles mark the cardinal points and must be lit in specific sequence. The herbs are burned as an offering. The guardian is drawn to certain scents, certain vibrations. And the chalice? Catherine's expression grew somber. For blood. The binding requires a sacrifice from those performing the ritual, willing blood, freely given. It creates a counterbalance to the blood the guardian has already taken. Michael mentioned I need help. Are you? No, she interrupted. I cannot enter the ritual space. My presence would complicate matters. But I've found others who can assist you. She handed me a slip of paper with 3 names. They'll meet you at the north entrance to the maintenance tunnels at midnight. I studied the names, recognizing none of them. Who are these people? Others who have encountered the guardian and survived. Others who bear its mark, though in different forms than yours. She nodded toward my palm. The entity leaves an impression on anyone who interacts with it directly. These individuals have as much stake in containing it as you do. I glanced at the silver dagger Wayland had given me, still in its box. Will this really work? Michael made it sound like we're just postponing the inevitable. Catherine sighed. The Guardian is ancient, possibly as old as human consciousness itself. We don't fully understand what it is or where it came from. Some believe it's a psychic parasite that feeds on human transition states. Others think it's a manifestation of collective unconscious fears about change and uncertainty. Whatever it is, it cannot be destroyed by conventional means. Then why bother fighting it? Because each binding buys time. Decades, sometimes centuries before it finds a new way to manifest. Time for humanity to advance, to perhaps find a permanent solution. She smiled thinly. Consider it a relay race through history. We run our leg, then pass the responsibility to the next generation. As she showed me out through the bookstore, I noticed symbols etched subtly into the door frames, protective words similar to those in Blackwell's journal. Catherine, I said, pausing at the exit. What exactly is your role in all this? She met my gaze steadily. I am a record keeper. I document each manifestation, each binding, each new insight into the Guardian's nature. Knowledge is our best weapon, Mr. Mercer. Remember that when you face it tonight. I spent the hours before midnight reviewing the binding ritual, memorizing the Latin incantations inscribed on the dagger's blade, and researching my 3 assigned companions. Lisa Chen was a graduate student in theoretical physics whose entire research team had disappeared during an experiment 3 years ago. Official reports cited a lab accident, but Lisa had spent the intervening time investigating occult explanations. Marcus Holloway was a former priest who now worked as a grief counselor. He'd been present at an exorcism gone wrong in his parish, the details of which had been suppressed by the church. James Ward was a novelist whose horror fiction featured recurrent themes of shadow entities and liminal spaces. His author bio mentioned a nervous breakdown following unexplained experiences that had inspired his work. All 3 had encountered something they couldn't explain. All 3 bore scars of some kind, whether physical or psychological. All 3 had reason to want the Guardian contained. At 11:30, I arrived at the North Service entrance to the university's maintenance tunnels. The campus was quiet, most buildings dark except for security lighting. A chain-link fence surrounded the entrance, but the lock had been cut, the gates slightly ajar. Lisa arrived first, a petite woman with intense eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She nodded at my scarred palm. Threshold mark. Recent. She held up her own hand, showing a different symbol burned into her skin. 3 years, 2 months. Marcus and James arrived together, already acquainted apparently. Marcus was older, with a calm presence that belied the nervous energy in his eyes. James was thin and jumpy, constantly scanning our surroundings. We should hurry, Marcus said after brief introductions. Midnight approaches, and the Guardian will be at its strongest during the liminal hour. We descended into the tunnels, flashlights illuminating concrete passages marked with faded directional signs and utility markers. The air grew colder as we went deeper, our breath forming clouds in the beams of light. How will we find it? James asked, his voice echoing slightly. We won't, I replied. It will find us. Or rather, it will find me. I held up my scarred palm, which had begun to throb painfully, the silver lines turning slowly black. We just need to find a suitable location for the ritual. A threshold space. The old Nork, Lisa suggested. Where the hospital kept bodies before transport. A literal threshold between life and death. I nodded, the choice feeling right. The pain in my palm intensified as we navigated the maze-like tunnels, leading us deeper beneath the university. Tell us about your encounter, Marcus said as we walked. Each manifestation is unique to the vessel. I described finding the journal, the blood connection, Eleanor's death, and the transformation of the book into something alive. It has a physical form now, but it's not stable. Waylon said it's been feeding, growing stronger. The physical form is a vulnerability, Lisa explained. It limits the Guardian's power but gives it access to our reality. It's trying to feed enough to shed that limitation while maintaining its foothold here. And if it succeeds? James asked. Collapse of liminal boundaries, Marcus answered grimly. Dreams invading waking life. The dead walking among the living. Past, present, and future converging. Madness on a global scale. We fell silent as we approached a set of heavy double doors marked Morgan faded letters. My palm burned like fire now, the scar fully black, pulsating with a rhythm separate from my heartbeat. It's here, I whispered. The doors swung open on their own, revealing a large tiled room with drainage channels in the floor and empty metal tables bolted in rows. Shadows gathered in the corners, deeper than they should have been, moving against the lights of our flashlights. In the center of the room sat the thing that had been Blackwell's journal. It had grown, now the size of a large dog, its multiple limbs arranged around it like a grotesque spider. The cover had split to form a mouth filled with page teeth, and what looked like eyes had developed along its spine. The creature pulsed and shifted, its form never quite settling, as if it existed in multiple states simultaneously. The vessel, Lisa breathed. As our lights fell on it, the creature turned toward us. Its mouth opened wider than should have been possible, revealing an impossible depth inside, a darkness that seemed to go on forever. You've brought others with my mark, it said in multiple overlapping voices. How thoughtful. More vessels for the crossing. Marcus stepped forward, raising a crucifix. We come to bind you, Guardian. To send you back beyond the threshold. The creature made a sound like pages ripping, laughter. The priest who lost his faith. The scientist who lost her colleagues. The writer who lost his mind. And the scholar who opened the door. It rose on its limbs, looming larger. You cannot bind what you don't understand. Now, I commanded. We spread out, taking positions at the cardinal points of the room. Lisa began marking the floor with chalk, drawing the containment circle from the diagrams I'd studied. James lit the black candles in sequence, reciting words of power with each flame. Marcus and I approached the center, carrying the silver chalice. Blood freely given creates a binding none can break, Marcus intoned. He drew the ritual dagger across his palm, allowing blood to flow into the chalice. I did the same, our mingled blood shimmering with unusual luminosity in the candlelight. The creature watched, its form rippling with agitation. The shadows in the room gathered around it protectively, darkening despite our flashlights. You think you were the first to try? It hissed. Blackwell thought he could control me. The priest thought he could exorcise me. The scientist thought she could quantify me. The writer thought he could fictionalize me. Its voice lowered to a malevolent whisper. I consumed them all. I will consume you. The shadows surged forward, extinguishing 2 of the candles. James cried out as darkness enveloped him, his form blurring as if viewed through water. When the shadows receded, he stood motionless, his eyes completely black. James? Lisa called. He turned toward her, movements jerky and raw. James is elsewhere, the Guardian spoke through him. Exploring the spaces between life and death, sanity and madness. Would you like to join him? He lunged at Lisa, who barely scrambled away in time. Complete the circle. I shouted to her. We can still bind it. Marcus and I continued the ritual, pouring the blood around the creature's main form. As the crimson liquid touched the floor, it began to glow, forming symbols that corresponded to those on the dagger. The creature shrieked, its form contorting. The possessed James attacked again, this time grabbing Marcus, who struggled to break free. I was left alone to complete the ritual. I raised the dagger, reciting the final words of binding, by blood freely given, by will freely offered, by power freely acknowledged. I bind thee to this vessel, I seal thee within these limits, I command thee to remain beyond the threshold. The circle of blood erupted in blue flame. The creature writhed and thrashed, its limbs flailing against an invisible barrier. James collapsed, the Guardian's influence momentarily broken. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The creature's form began to stabilize, becoming more solid, less fluid. The shadows retreated from the burning circle. Then, with horrifying suddenness, the creature's mouth gaped open, wider and wider until it seemed to split its entire body. From within emerged a humanoid shape, tall and emaciated, Thomas Blackwell, his body covered in ritual scars, his eyes black voids. Did you think I would make the same mistake twice? He rasped. The vessel was never the book. The book was merely the doorway. I am the vessel. I have always been the vessel. The binding circle flickered, weakening. The creature's body collapsed in on itself, the pages crumbling to dust as Blackwell stepped fully into our reality. The ritual has failed, Marcus whispered in horror. We've given it exactly what it wanted, a way to shed its temporary form. Blackwell's corpse turned to me, his mouth stretching into an inhuman smile. You opened the door wider than any before you. Your blood was the key that finally released me from the incomplete vessel I had become. He reached for me with elongated fingers. Now I will claim what is mine. In desperation, I slashed at him with the ritual dagger. The silver blade passed through his form as if through smoke, but where it cut, his substance seemed to unravel, trailing away like wisps of darkness. The dagger, Lisa cried, helping James to his feet. It doesn't bind the Guardian, it severs connections. Understanding flooded through me. The ritual had never been about binding the entity to a vessel, it had been about separating it from our reality entirely. I raised the dagger again, focusing on the connection I felt to the Guardian, the tether symbolized by the mark on my palm. With all my will, I brought the blade down across my scarred hand. Pain exploded through me, blinding and absolute. The scar split open, black ichor rather than blood pouring from the wound. Blackwell's corpse screamed, its form beginning to disintegrate at the edges. What have you done? It shrieked. Severed the tether, I gasped through the pain. You can't exist here without a connection to a living vessel. Blackwell's form collapsed inward, imploding like a star becoming a black hole. The shadows in the room were pulled toward this singularity, swirling into the void that had opened where he had stood. Marcus grabbed my bleeding hand, pressing his crucifix against the wound. Complete the banishing, he commanded, before it finds another way through. Together, the four of us recited the words inscribed on the dagger's blade, our voices joining in harmony. The vortex of darkness pulsed, resistant, but with each repetition of the incantation, it contracted further. With a final, furious shriek that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the guardian was sucked into the void, which sealed itself with a thunderous clap that shook the foundations of the tunnel. Silence fell. The regular shadows of the morgue returned. My hand still bled, but now it was ordinary red blood flowing from the wound. The black ichor had vanished. We stood in a circle, exhausted and shaken but alive. The binding, no, the banishing, had worked. Or so we thought. Do you know what it means to stand on the threshold? Not just between rooms or moments, but between realities? Between who you were and who you're becoming. 1 month after the ritual in the morgue, I sat in Catherine's bookshop, examining my scarred palm. The silver lines had returned, but they formed a different pattern now, not the eye of the threshold, but a more complex symbol that Catherine called the seal of severance. The ritual was successful, she assured me, pouring tea into delicate cups. The guardian has been banished from our reality. The tether is broken. Yet something felt unfinished. In the weeks since that night, I'd experienced strange dreams, visions of shadow realms where time moved differently, where thought became substance and emotions took physical form. I'd wake gasping, the boundary between sleep and wakefulness momentarily blurred, the dream world lingering like an afterimage. Then why do I still feel connected? I asked, rubbing the scar gently. Why these dreams? These perceptions? Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. The guardian exists at the intersection of realities. When you severed the connection, part of you, your awareness, may have expanded into that liminal space. You glimpse what exists beyond ordinary perception. Will it fade? Perhaps. Or perhaps you've been changed permanently. Many who encounter the guardian are never quite the same afterward. She studied me over the rim of her teacup. Have you been in contact with the others? I nodded. Lisa had returned to her research, now exploring theoretical models of intersecting dimensions with renewed vigor. Marcus had left the grief counseling practice to establish a support group for those who had experienced inexplicable phenomena. James had begun a new novel, his nightmares finally giving way to more nuanced explorations of liminal experiences. We all bore scars. We all carried the knowledge that reality was thinner, more permeable than most people realized. But we were healing. And Wayland? Catherine asked. I haven't seen him since the cemetery. A thought occurred to me. How did he know so much about the guardian? About me? Catherine's eyes shifted away briefly. Michael has been involved with the guardian longer than most. His understanding runs deep. Too deep, I suggested. Sometimes I wonder if he told us the whole truth. If the ritual really banished the guardian, or just changed its form again. Catherine didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small package wrapped in cloth. This arrived for you this morning. No sender information. The package was heavy for its size, dense. As I unwrapped it, I revealed a small stone cube covered in carvings, symbols similar to those in Blackwell's journal, but older, more primitive in execution. What is this? I asked. A threshold stone. Ancient cultures placed them at boundaries, doorways, crossroads, shorelines, to mark the transition between spaces. This one appears to be pre-Sumerian. I turned the cube in my hands, feeling its weight, its significance. Carved into one face was a symbol that matched my scar exactly, the seal of severance. There's a note, Catherine said, pointing to a small folded paper that had fallen from the wrapping. I opened it to find a message in elegant handwriting. The guardian is banished but not destroyed. It waits beyond the threshold, seeking new vessels, new gateways. The stone will warn you when the barrier's thin. Keep watch. M.W. Wayland, I murmured. He knew this wasn't over. It's never over, Catherine said softly. The battle between order and chaos, between boundaries and dissolution, has existed since consciousness first emerged. We are merely the current custodians of that struggle. I pocketed the threshold stone, feeling its weight against my leg, a reminder, a warning, a responsibility. Over the following weeks, I returned to my research, but with a new focus. I began documenting threshold phenomena across cultures, gathering accounts of entities that existed at the borders of perception. My dissertation evolved into an exploration of liminality itself, the spaces between defined states, the moments of transition where reality became malleable. The dreams continued, but I no longer feared them. Instead, I recorded them meticulously upon waking, noting patterns, recurrences, symbols. They became a kind of map to the spaces beyond ordinary perception. 3 months after the ritual, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working late in my new office. The university had granted me a research fellowship following my groundbreaking work on cross-cultural ritualistic practices when a knock came at the door. "Come in," I called, not looking up from my notes. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My breath fogged in the air. The threshold stone in my pocket grew warm against my leg. I looked up to find Thomas Blackwell standing before my desk. Not the corrupted, entity-possessed version we had banished, but the man as he must have appeared in life, middle-aged, scholarly, with intelligent eyes and a serious expression. Yet there was something not quite solid about him, as if he existed partially in another dimension. "Dr. Blackwell," I said, surprised by my own calmness. "Mr. Mercer." His voice had an echoey quality, like someone speaking in an empty hall. "I see you've continued the work." I glanced at the threshold stone I placed on my desk. It glowed faintly from within, pulsing with soft light. "Don't worry," Blackwell said, following my gaze. "I haven't come as the Guardian's vessel. That connection was severed by your ritual. What you see is residual, an echo trapped between states." "A ghost," I suggested. He smiled thinly. "A crude term, but not entirely inaccurate. I exist now in the liminal space, neither fully here nor fully there, neither alive nor truly dead. Why are you here? To warn you. The ritual didn't destroy the Guardian, nothing can. It merely banished it beyond the immediate threshold. It's regrouping, seeking new connections, new vessels. I thought of my dreams, the persistent feeling of being watched from just beyond normal perception. It's still trying to break through." Blackwell nodded. "The Guardian is patient. It operates on a timescale beyond human comprehension. What seems like defeat to us is merely a temporary setback to it." "Then what was the point of the ritual? Of any of this?" "Time," he said simply. "We buy time for humanity to advance, to understand, to perhaps one day develop the means to address the Guardian permanently." The parallels to what Catherine had told me were striking. "You've spoken with Wayland," I guessed. A strange expression crossed Blackwell's face. "Michael Wayland is more than he appears." "As are you, now." "What do you mean?" "The severance ritual changed you, Mr. Mercer. When you cut the connection between yourself and the Guardian, you didn't simply revert to your former state. You've been expanded. Your consciousness now perceives thresholds that most humans cannot." I thought of my dreams, the strange moments of perception where realities seemed to shift around me. I'm becoming like you. Not exactly. I surrendered to the Guardian willingly, became its vessel by choice. My current state is punishment for my hubris. You rejected it, severed the connection. Your liminality is different, a gift rather than a curse. A gift for what purpose? To watch, to warn, to prepare. Blackwell's form flickered, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. The Guardian will return, and when it does, it will seek those already marked by its influence. The others, I said, thinking of Lisa, Marcus, and James. They're in danger? Everyone who bears the Guardian's mark exists in a state of perpetual risk, he confirmed. But they're also sensitized to its presence. Early warning systems, if you will. I touched the threshold stone, feeling its steady pulse against my fingertips. And this? What exactly does it do? It's a detection device of sorts. The ancients carved them from stones found at natural thresholds, volcanic boundaries, riverbanks, cave entrances. They resonate when liminal energy gathers. His gaze sharpened. Keep it with you always. When it grows warm, boundaries are thinning. Why are you helping me? After everything that happened. Blackwell's expression softened slightly. I was an arrogant fool who thought he could control the Guardian, use its power for knowledge. I didn't understand what I was unleashing. He glanced down at his semi-transparent hands. This existence, trapped between states, provides ample time for reflection and regret. Is there no way to free you? My fate is tied to the Guardian now. Only its final banishment would release me. He began to fade, his outline blurring. I don't have much time. The effort to manifest here is taxing. Wait, I said urgently. You mentioned Wayland is more than he appears. What did you mean? Blackwell's form was nearly transparent now, his voice becoming distant. Ask yourself why he knows so much. Why he survived so long. Why the shadows avoid him. His final words came as barely a whisper. Not all vessels are unwilling, Daniel. Some have learned to negotiate terms. Then he was gone, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. 6 months passed. I established a network with Lisa, Marcus, and James, creating protocols for monitoring threshold activity across the country. Lisa developed instruments that could detect subtle energy fluctuations at known liminal sites. Marcus used his counseling connections to identify others who might have encountered the Guardian in different forms. James's novels became coded warnings, seeding protected knowledge in popular culture. The threshold stone remained quiet, its internal glow dim but constant, until the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. I was in my apartment, sorting through field reports from our growing network of threshold watchers, when the stone suddenly blazed to life, pulsing with intense light and heat. Almost simultaneously, my phone rang. Lisa's voice came through, tense with urgency. Daniel, the monitors are going crazy. Something's happening. Something big. Where? Everywhere. All monitoring stations are picking up massive energy spikes. But the epicenter seems to be Wayland's estate, I finished, somehow knowing it with certainty. How did you? Meet me there. Call the others. The old cemetery looked different in winter, the leafless trees like skeletal hands reaching toward the star-filled sky. Snow crunched beneath our feet as the four of us approached Wayland's gates, which stood ominously open. No one's seen Wayland for months, Marcus said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. His housekeeper reported him missing 3 weeks ago. The threshold stone in my pocket burned like a coal. My scarred palm throbbed in sympathetic rhythm. He's here, I said. So is the guardian. James, who had been quiet, suddenly gasped, pointing toward the house. Look! The windows of Wayland's mansion pulsed with an unnatural light, not the warm glow of lamps but a cold, shifting radiance that seemed to bend the very air around the building. Shadows danced across the grounds, moving against the light rather than with it. It's happening again, Lisa whispered. The boundaries are collapsing. We approached cautiously, the threshold stone guiding me like a compass. It led us not to the main house but to a small stone chapel at the edge of the cemetery. The chapel door hung open, darkness beckoning from within. As we crossed the threshold, candles ignited spontaneously along the walls, revealing a circular chamber transformed. The pews had been removed, replaced by an intricate pattern etched into the stone floor, a massive version of the symbol on my palm. In the center stood Wayland, but not as we had known him. His form shifted and flowed, alternating between his human appearance and something else, something ancient and vast, with too many angles and dimensions to comprehend fully. You've come, he said, his voice layered with others. The circle is complete. Wayland, I called out, what have you done? He smiled, an expression that seemed to crack his face like porcelain. What I have always done, Daniel. I have negotiated. I have compromised. I have survived. Understanding dawned. You're the original vessel, I breathed. The first to bind the guardian. The first to embrace it, he corrected. Centuries ago, when it first crossed the threshold into our reality. Others fought it, tried to banish it, to destroy it. I alone understood its true nature. Which is what? Lisa demanded. Evolution, Wayland answered simply. The guardian isn't evil, merely transformative. It dissolves boundaries because boundaries are illusions, constructs we created to make sense of a reality too complex for our limited perception. Those boundaries keep us sane, Marcus argued. Keep us human. Precisely. Wayland's form rippled, becoming momentarily monstrous before settling back into human shape. Humanity is a transitional state. The guardian offers the next step. At the cost of how many lives? I challenged. Wayland waved dismissively. Growth requires sacrifice. I've contained the guardian's hunger, channeled it, directed it toward those who wouldn't be missed. But now, he looked down at his hands, which flickered between flesh and shadow. Now my vessel fails. After centuries of symbiosis, I can no longer maintain the separation between my consciousness and the guardians. The air in the chapel thickened, pressure building against my eardrums. The candle flames stretched unnaturally tall, their light seeming to bend around Wayland's form. You sent me Blackwell's journal deliberately, I realized. You wanted me to release part of the guardian, to prepare a new vessel. You were perfect, Wayland confirmed. Intelligent, curious, with just enough sensitivity to liminal energies. I'd hoped you would embrace the transformation willingly, as I once did. When you resisted, he shrugged. Other methods became necessary. The others who died, Eleanor, the 3 after her, their deaths were part of your plan. Necessary sacrifices to strengthen the guardian enough for the transition. Wayland's eyes had become completely black, reflecting nothing. But now we've run out of time. My form can no longer contain the entity. It must transfer, or it will break free entirely. He extended a hand toward me, darkness flowing from his fingertips like smoke. You bear its mark already, Daniel. The transition would be easier for you than it was for me. Less painful. Less fragmenting. The threshold stone in my pocket burned white hot. My scarred palm felt as if it were being branded again. Behind me, I sensed Lisa, Marcus, and James forming a protective semicircle. No, I said firmly. I rejected it once. I'll reject it again. Wayland's face contorted with sudden rage. Then you condemn this world to chaos. Without a conscious vessel to direct it, the Guardian will dissolve all boundaries indiscriminately. Reality itself will unravel. As if in response to his words, the chapel began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the walls, not breaking but bending, revealing glimpses of impossible spaces beyond, twisted landscapes, crumbling cities, vast cosmic voids. It's beginning, Lisa cried, her instruments beeping frantically. The threshold is rupturing. Wayland fell to his knees, his form beginning to disintegrate. You fools, he hissed through a mouth that kept changing shape. You have no idea what you've done. In that moment of crisis, I felt a presence beside me, Blackwell, more solid than before, his eyes clear and determined. The severance ritual, he urged. Not to bind, but to separate completely. Cut all connections to this reality. How? I demanded, watching as Wayland's body began to lose cohesion, darkness pouring from him like smoke from a collapsing building. The stone, Blackwell pointed to my pocket. It's not just a detector, it's a key. Place it in the center of the Guardian's essence while we perform the ritual. Understanding flowed through me. I pulled out the threshold stone, now glowing so brightly it hurt to look at directly. Its carvings matched exactly the pattern etched into the chapel floor. Lisa, Marcus, James, I called. Form a circle around Wayland. Join hands. As Wayland's human form dissolved completely, revealing the Guardian in its raw state, a writhing mass of shadow and light, angles and curves that hurt the mind to perceive, we moved into position. The four of us formed a circle around the entity, our scarred palms facing inward. Blackwell stood slightly apart, intoning words in a language that seemed to predate human speech. I stepped forward, the threshold stone held before me like a shield. The Guardian's essence reached for me with tendrils of darkness, but wherever they touched the stone, they recoiled. By our scars, we claim authority, I recited, remembering the words inscribed on the stone's base. By our will, we establish boundaries. By our union, we enforce separation. Lisa, Marcus, and James repeated the words, our voices harmonizing in perfect resonance. The stone began to vibrate in my hands, its light growing impossibly bright. You cannot banish what has always existed. The Guardian's voice thundered from everywhere and nowhere. I am the space between moments, the gap between thoughts, the breath between words. We don't seek to destroy you, I replied, continuing forward. Only to return you to your proper domain. Beyond the threshold, beyond the boundary, beyond our reality. With a final surge of determination, I thrust the stone into the heart of the Guardian's essence. It sank in like a key entering a lock, perfectly aligned. Light erupted from the connection point, blinding in its intensity. The Guardian's form contracted violently around the stone, pulling inward with such force that the air itself seemed to bend toward it. The veil! Blackwell shouted over the roaring vacuum. Tear the veil completely. Understanding instinctively what he meant, I pressed my scarred palm against the stone now embedded in the Guardian's essence. Pain shot through me, absolute and clarifying. I felt the others doing the same, our four marks creating a circuit of power. Reality itself seemed to split along invisible seams. The chapel walls dissolved, revealing not the cemetery beyond but a vast liminal landscape, a place of infinite thresholds, endless transitions, where nothing was fixed and everything existed in a state of perpetual becoming. The Guardian expanded into this realm like water finding its level, its form becoming less chaotic, more harmonious as it returned to its natural domain. Now, Blackwell commanded, "Seal the breach." We spoke the final words of the ritual in perfect unison. What belongs beyond remains beyond. What belongs within stays within. The threshold stands. The boundary holds. The separation endures. With a sound like the universe taking a deep breath, reality snapped back into place. The Guardian vanished, along with the threshold stone. The chapel rematerialized around us, ordinary and solid. Where Wayland had stood, nothing remained, not even dust. 1 year later, I stood in Catherine's bookshop, examining a new acquisition, a medieval text describing encounters with liminal entities across Europe. "Any reactions from the stone?" she asked, arranging protective symbols around the text. I touched my chest, where the threshold stone now resided, not physically, but as a permanent part of me, embedded somehow during that final confrontation. Quiet. Just the occasional warmth when I passed particularly thin spots in reality. After the Guardian's banishment, we discovered changes in ourselves. Lisa could perceive energy patterns invisible to normal senses. Marcus could instinctively identify those who had encountered liminal phenomena. James's dreams had become prophetic, glimpsing potential futures where boundaries might weaken again. As for me, I had become a literal threshold guardian, sensitive to the smallest fluctuations between realities, able to strengthen weak points before they could rupture. "And Blackwell?" Catherine inquired. "Free," I said simply. The Guardian's return to its proper domain released him from his liminal state. He moved on, elsewhere. Catherine nodded, satisfied. "And Wayland's research? His records?" "Secured. The estate contains centuries of observations, rituals, and knowledge about liminal phenomena. We're still cataloging it all." I closed the medieval text carefully. It's strange, sometimes I almost understand the Guardian's purpose now. Not malevolent, just incompatible with our reality. "Understanding is progress," Catherine said. "The ancients feared what they couldn't comprehend. They banished and bound out terror. But you..." She studied me with those piercing green eyes. "You separated from a place of knowledge. That makes all the difference." As I left the bookshop that evening, I paused on the threshold, feeling the subtle shift in energy that marked the transition from one space to another. All around us, such boundaries existed, invisible, powerful, necessary. Not solid walls but permeable membranes, allowing controlled exchange between states of being. I thought of Wayland, who had sought to dissolve these boundaries, and of Blackwell, who had tried to control what lay beyond them. Both had failed because they had misunderstood the fundamental truth. We need thresholds not as barriers but as definitions, the lines that give shape to existence, that make meaning possible in a universe of infinite possibility. I stepped through the doorway, feeling the familiar tingle as I crossed from one defined space to another. The threshold stone within me hummed contentedly, recognizing the transition. For now, at least, the boundaries held. The Guardian remained in its proper domain. and I remained at my post, watching the thresholds, guarding the in-between. But sometimes, in dreams, I glimpse the liminal landscape where the guardian dwells, and I wonder if our separation is truly as complete as we believe. For what is a threshold, after all, but a promise that crossing remains possible? Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.